Hello and welcome to the Deepest Dive from MinnMax. I'm Ben Hansen, and this is the best, most thorough discussion about Final Fantasy VII Remake on the internet. Bonus edition! I'm still here with best friend Ronnie.
Hello!
And Grant, who's just world-renowned for his cooking role on MinnSnacks.
Hello.
Is there a better way to introduce you at this point, Grant?
No.
Okay, great. We'll stick with that.
Warzone extraordinaire.
That's right. And we're missing, obviously, Jeffem and Kyle because there are a couple of prickly turds who over 20 years ago said, we're too good for Final Fantasy VII. We're busy. And look at them now. Look who's laughing now. So here's the thing, everybody. We're going to spoil the original Final Fantasy VII in its entirety.
Wait, hang on.
Yeah.
Do I not get introduced?
Oh my God, it's the voice of Joe Juba from Game Informer. Welcome, Joe.
Hello.
Oh my God. Joe, I worked with for many a moon back at Game Informer. Also, we did an entire game club discussion for the full original Final Fantasy VII back there as well.
We did. I actually listened to some of that again recently to refresh my memory.
Oh, nice. Yeah, before we started this game club, I listened to the full thing at like 2 times speed because I'm not nuts, but it was very fun. We said the word MinnMax probably 3 or so times throughout the discussion, and it's a very fun feeling now to be like, oh, you idiots. You had no idea, you idiots. But
He was hinting the whole time.
It was all right in front of your noses, just like the ultimate theory of what's happening in the ending of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So with this bonus discussion, we're talking about the ending a little bit more. Now that we've processed it, our last discussion with the Deepest Dive is a little bit raw, is a little confused. There was a moment where Ronnie started to shed a tear because he was so overwhelmed by the theories being thrown out. But now we're all smart as a whip. We know exactly what's going on, and we're going to explain it, and also just talk about the full remake through the lens of the original game. So if you have not finished the original game, go do it, honestly. Get it on Switch, get it on PC, PS4, wherever you want to play it. I still think it holds up pretty well. A lot of people, it seems like, are interested in continuing that story. I still think you'd have a great time. But anyways, once you finish that original game, then you can come back and absorb the rest of this. Also at the same time, if you are watching this on YouTube and you don't know what this is, it's completely disconnected from everything else for you. We have done a very thorough game club discussion for all of Final Fantasy VII Remake. You can find it in a huge playlist. So we've talked about the game for 14 hours, and this is just a fun bonus on top of that. It's the sweet dessert at the end of the full game club discussion. Also, more table setting, Joe. If you're watching this on YouTube and you want to listen to this as a podcast in the audio form, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns, to unlock the podcast feed, the exclusive audio feed, which is filled with a bunch of additional stuff, including audio versions of all of our deepest dives. Joe Juba, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm jealous of you, but I'm also fascinated by you because you played this game for review. You reviewed it for Game Informer and gave it an 8.75, which I think we're all here to yell at you about that review score, it seems. No, I think
too low to you?
It struck me as a little low, but it's a tough one, I'd imagine, right? Because it's just like I have so much love for this game, but at the same time, and especially the more I sit back and reflect on it, like it is a wonky, weird, uneven game, but I love it so much for those reasons almost, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it brings up a question that I think is going to come up a lot even during this discussion. It's come up in your previous episodes of this, is that like you really have to weigh who this game is really for. Because on one hand, it seems to really, for 95% of it, really welcome the newcomers with open arms, reinterpreting this story, presenting a very approachable version of something that seemed sort of set in video game canon. And then for the last 5%, it just completely kicks them off the boat. And it's like hardcore fans only from this point forward.
I mean, this is tough. I've read so many comments that people submitted on the Patreon page. So I feel like I have a pretty good sense of where a lot of different people are at. And this is too simplistic, but like, seems like they made it a little bit for everybody, and at least from my perspective, they succeeded. Definitely there are those people that are like, this is off the rails, I don't know what this is. But at the same time, people like Alex Stednick, video editor over at Game Informer, or, I think Kyle and Jeffem to some extent with this deepest dive, they're curious about it. They're more curious about like, what are all these things? They're more intrigued by the story of Final Fantasy VII. There's a lot of people that were playing along with us that went back to the original 7. And for us, I'd argue it gets weird, but at the same time, it adds so much mystery and fun to the future of the remake that, in a way, isn't it mission accomplished for him?
I think that's definitely one way of looking at it. I think when it comes down to like writing a review, you just end up having to put so many different things on the scale and weighing the way the story pays off. I can't divorce myself from my own experience with Final Fantasy VII and like the love I've had for it for all these years. So I can't like really pretend to imagine what it is like coming at it with fresh eyes. Right. So I could really only look at it from like my perspective, and that came from a place of like, I don't know, I guess at the end of the day, I felt like it hit a lot of those nostalgic notes really well. And
very well.
And then it left me disappointed in some critical ways.
You recorded a big episode of Spoiled over there on Game Informer with Alex, and you seemed pretty negative about some aspects of the ending. You had a good open mind about it, but has your opinion shifted at all since you finished it? Have you warmed up to it more, or just got more frustrated, or where are you at now that you're trying to soak in this theoretical world of people on the internet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think ultimately I am at a place of a little more optimism than I was when I recorded that thing with Alex.
Okay, well, that's nice.
Which the thrust there, I think, was I was okay with it being different, but when they introduced the idea of like time travel and or multiple realities, that is just like that was a real turd in the pool for me.
I get it. Ronnie, I was thinking about this. We were so scared about spoilers going through this game and scared of YouTube and comments and people leaving comments. By the way, I got so many nice comments. There's one person who's very sweet, and I'm sorry I forget their name, but they're the one that left that comment about like, Ronnie knows a little bit too much. I think he knows what the whispers are. And he actually hadn't finished the game. He was just also guessing. But he's like, I totally get that. It seemed like I'd finished, so I apologize if I was coming across as a dick. And he was very sweet. Like, no, you're great. You're great. Sorry, we were mean to you. But the point, I was thinking about this little thought experiment. Like, if you wanted to be an internet troll and you had finished this game before other people, or you wanted to spoil stuff, what would you type? What is like the most succinct way of spoiling Final Fantasy VII Remake?
Well, I think anything where you're like just saying exactly kind of like what that guy did. Just saying like, hey, hang on, that's a little too on the nose.
Okay, but not about our videos. What about if you were just, there was the reveal of Assassin's Creed Valhalla through that guy painting. If you were to jump in that Twitch chat and just leave the most spoiler thing, what is the one sentence that you would type in there? Like
looks like Norse.
Boot this guy.
I have no idea.
No, I think for FF7, it's pretty simply just the Whispers are trying to make the events of Final Fantasy VII Remake, or the Whispers are trying to make the events of Final Fantasy VII happen
Twitch message too long.
In the remake.
Yeah. Okay. What about just you kill Fate? You fight Fate and Sephiroth. End boss equals Fate plus Sephiroth. Isn't that a good way to boil it down?
I don't know. You fight Fate in so many Final Fantasy games.
Wow. What if you just typed in, you were playing Advent Children, not Final Fantasy VII?
That's not bad. That's not bad.
Or another one that you could just say, this is a sequel, not a remake.
So, okay. Is that where we're all at?
So that one resonates with me the most. Actually, this is a sequel, not a remake.
Which would be very fun. Let's see. So, good lad Andrew Vala, of course, wrote in because he's been with us for a long time. And he said, Final Fantasy VII is 100% a sequel to the original Final Fantasy VII release, and it's cleverly playing off of all the expectations fans have of the original game. The original game begins and ends with a shot of Aerith praying next to the leaking Mako pipe in the alleyway. She's been communicating with the planet her whole life. There's a lot to unpack here, but I do love that Andrew Vala is just laying it all out there. So let's say where we're at. Last time we were going in a little bit raw, trying to unpack our feelings. Since then, I have to give a huge tip of the cap to Easy Allies and their spoiler mode discussion with Maximilian, and then also Drop Frames also had a spoiler discussion with this Maximilian dude fellow who I did not know before this, but he is a pitch perfect voice for talking about Final Fantasy VII and the remake because he's not slobbing the knob of Advent Children. He's aware of what sucks within the Final Fantasy world, but at the same time, he has a very interesting take for advancing some of these theories and helping to boil things down. So what did you guys absorb? How much did you scour the internet to try and unpack what's going on here?
Easy Allies was the only thing I listened to.
Okay. And what was your gut reaction to the levels of Maximilian Dude?
I think I'm on level 2.5.
Okay. I think I'm roughly in that same camp of, I think there's some of those things that I was resisting for a while. Then it's like, okay, I'm on board. This is future Sephiroth going back in time. I mean, there's probably still some wiggle room, but that's almost a lock in my brain at some point.
Seems like it.
Yeah, I fall off on some things. The part that always gets me is like when people start trying to read too much into music cues. And like, oh, this music cue is tying into that. It's like, I've been burned by Star Wars for so long and that stuff. Them being like, you can hear Darth Sidious's theme at this moment in Force Awakens, blah, blah, blah. It's like, blah, blah, blah. And so there's definitely a deep end that I think is a bit too much. But Joe, hopefully with this discussion, we can try and lay out what we're feeling pretty confident about and then what we think is kind of the hairy end of that theory spectrum, right?
Yeah. I mean, Ben, you may remember, I am really not into this level of theory crafting around games that have, that have very intense fandoms.
Why is that?
I experienced this around Metal Gear games also, right? Where like people get really invested in the fiction and they get really invested in their own theories about it. And then they use like already sketchy assumptions to build even sketchier assumptions on top of them, right?
Yes. And the internet hive mind collects, and I'm always in this zone of like, wait, they overlooked this one factor, and now they're on to step 2, but step 1 is a little more rickety than they would like to believe,
Exactly. So when it comes to this kind of discussion, I generally really rely on the things that you can pretty much support with undeniable evidence.
Which, at this point, what do you think that is?
Well, okay. So there are a lot of things, but I think a good example of this would be the idea that the debate about what those 3 like warrior whispers are that you fight.
Yeah.
Whisper Rubrum, Croseo, and I don't remember what the other one is. But like it seems at this point pretty undeniable that is Kadaj, Yazoo, and Laz from Advent Children.
And it's that thing, too, of like, okay, you can go a number of different ways with this. Some people take it so far as Sephiroth is playing 4D chess. He is actually controlling fate and destiny at this point and therefore bringing them back. I'm more in the camp of it's above an Easter egg, but it's just that idea of fate harnessing these people and trying to stop you because if you defeat fate, then it means that maybe those 3 don't exist. I'm more in that camp where it's, it's a juicy Easter egg, but it's not exactly this intertangled web. Right. So like I guess the example I'd give beyond that, like the step that I won't make beyond that is that because there's a correlation with those 3 characters there. Because of that, it is the Advent Children Sephiroth that you are fighting. Yeah. And I don't know for sure if I buy into that yet. You think that this might be just the Sephiroth from in between the original 7 and Advent Children, but he is in fact time traveling. I think it is a different Sephiroth. Is it an alternate universe Sephiroth? Is it a Sephiroth from the future? Like I think the nature of that villain is something that is too far out there that we can put in that category of this is a thing we know. Yes. Ronnie, how are you feeling so far?
So I also listened to the Easy Allies spoiler mode podcast and was just blown away by Maximilian, and just like it was so much fun to hear how he would kind of build things more and more and more, and pretty soon we're on the height of level 4 where I'm hitting subscribe to his channel so hard. And I really liked he had a lot of he's obviously very passionate, and he had a little fun theory crafting this, and he also has a lot of really compelling evidence to suggest that he might be onto something pretty big here. It sounded it's like he kind of convinced me, but then like it went back to this moment of like I can't weigh in about this, at least what he's saying, without playing the game one more time, because right now I'm taking it from his perspective and his narrative, and that may not be the same thing that I am seeing.
Right. Yeah.
So at this point, I am just floating in blank space right now, just thinking to myself, like, I want to replay this game again.
Right. It helps, having all the footage, and I can kind of scrub through it, like, just piecing together the video version of the Deepest Dive, or just in my own free time for fun, grabbing pictures, all that fun stuff to try and piece stuff together. And it definitely, I feel like I'm in a much better spot than the last episode, because I was so confused about who wants what. And at a certain point, it's like the missing ingredient was that time travel Sephiroth, but there's a lot to unpack there. But okay.
I've got a question for
Yeah.
you guys. So I don't have the insight into game development that Ben and Joe do. Do you think that they left the ending as ambiguous as they did because they have everything planned out, or because they have no freaking clue where they're going to go next?
So what they've said in that Ultimania interview is that, like, there's still a lot of details to be ironed out, exactly how many games it's going to be, stuff like that, but that they have the big picture roughly in place. I'm paraphrasing, but that's probably where they're at. If I had to take a guess, and I mean, a lot of it is fans can come up with a million theories, but then I think that Ultimania interview is like something concrete to grab onto for, like, what are the developers actually saying about this? And that's roughly where they seem like they're at. Joe, you wince.
Well, okay, I think you're generally right.
Thank you.
I think there is one statement in that Ultimania interview that is absolutely confusing, and I do not understand how it can be true. And that's, I think it was Katase who, I don't have the exact quote in front of him, but he essentially says that going forward, they are not going to significantly change the events of Final Fantasy VII, and you can generally expect the story as you've known it.
Here's what he's got. So, here's the full quote. So he says, we have a general idea of how the story will play out, but we haven't decided exactly how many parts, nor can we confirm anything. And then for that section there, Joe, he says, I've talked about this extensively with Nomura. I've screamed at Nomura. No, I've talked about this extensively, and I'm sure fans of the original are expecting to revisit familiar locations and scenes, so we have strong feelings to not stray away from that. From here on out, we're not drastically changing the story and making it into something completely different than the original. Even though it's a remake, please assume that Final Fantasy VII will still be Final Fantasy VII as usual. And then Nojima says, for me, I create scenarios that follow the general flow of the original story, but with the assumption that the way things are presented or how events occur might be slightly different. And Nomura says, the original and the remake are two separate entities, so even if you play Final Fantasy VII Remake, I would also like you to play the original Final Fantasy VII game as well. Katase, in the first installment, I think we were able to figure out the exact direction and shape we would like to take with the remake. Within the remake, many hints were strewn along, and we would like fans to get excited about and think about exactly what will happen in the next installments. The theories posted on the internet do reach us, and I think that type of communication between the fans will help us in creating a story together for all to enjoy. There's a lot to unpack there. And like, I love that, the Kadaj and his brothers have almost become these three creators trying to just read, like, where are they all at? Where are they agreeing? Where are they disagreeing? Because it's so easy to project this storyline of like, Nomura wants to change everything up completely, but Katase wants to keep it original. And that's the tension, which is, I'm sure, an oversimplification. But at the same time, they have such weird wiggle room. And maybe Katase is in his role more of the Final Fantasy brand ambassador of trying to say, hey, stay cool, fans, it'll all be cool. And Nomura seems like he wanted to remake things originally. He says that, when this idea first came about, that he reached out to Nojima, the writer, scenario writer, and said that he wanted this to be more than just a remake. He wanted it to be remade. And so there's a lot to try and wrap your mind around there. But I think it's probably somewhere in between, where they have a rough idea, and then it is Katase just stressing that, like, it's not going to be them leaving Midgar and it's, they go to Mars. I still think it's going to be you're hitting the big beats, but I think there's just going to be this extra level of tension, which I do think is a brilliant move on their part. Now all the original fans are going to have no idea what to expect, while at the same time probably going through a lot of things we expect.
Right, and also keeping us in, like, the players that have been, playing for a long time in a position of, like, is this really going to happen?
Right. And now I guess, we could talk about Aerith's death. It seems to be the big talking point about whether or not we think she will die. This is the first episode of The Deepest Dive where we've acknowledged that Aerith dies, which is crazy after 14 hours of talking about this game.
It's all been building up to this, finally.
Yes, exactly.
we had to ignore an animatronic cat like it was nothing, too.
What was with that moment? That was so dumb.
I know, and people wrote in trying to figure out, like, does that mean that Reeve saw the plate was falling and then got into his presumably VR setup to control catch it? Yeah. Or was he just milling about as the cat? And I guess we don't have to say the cat anymore, and we now have to actually say Cat-She?
Kate Sith. Everyone calls him Kate Sith.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're trying to...
Are we going to do that?
Yeah.
I feel like we got to do it. We can't be old stooges, Joe. It's Final Fantasy VI, not 3, and therefore we have to say Cat-She.
Cat-She? Do I say Cat-She?
I believe
Just like
so.
Cat-She, but Cat-She. Okay, I'll do that.
This coming from the guy who calls it Junin instead of
There's
Juno.
no evidence that it's not Junin! Although I think they do say it in Dirge of Cerberus repeatedly. They look directly at the camera. Joe, since last we've met, we finished Dirge of Cerberus. We played that entire game. Did you review that for Game Informer?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, do you have
Gave it a 10, didn't you?
Oh, I think so, yeah. I mean, it was perfect. If you like key cards, that is the game for you. Yep.
Do you have any memories of that other than key cards?
Card keys.
Oh, boy. I remember just being very angry at it.
What do you mean?
Like, because I had expectations and like excitement about how it was going to expand this world, and Vincent, who I think when I played that game, I was still kind of in the boat of him being very cool, and I liked him.
This was like the first Final Fantasy VII spin-off game that came out. Is that right?
Well, no. I think Before Crisis was before it.
And didn't Advent Children come out before it also?
I believe so.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Anyway, but the point being is that like suddenly the new villains they introduce are just so dumb, and there's some playable section with Kate Sith, I think, that just like a stealth section.
It's one stealth
sure is.
level. I thought there was going to be more. It was just one bad level squeezed in the middle of that thing.
Yeah, I do not have fond memories of that game.
Okay, that's fine. So Tanner Hoisington says maybe we can use this opportunity without the other guys to finally revisit that brief Cat-She cameo. I can never remember what his deal is. It is just so mind-boggling. And my favorite thing was when Kyle was talking about what a cool guy Reeve was. and then he was like, yeah, man, he rules. Everything he does is cool. No question about it. That was so fun. I feel like I was doing the thing that I didn't want to do every once in a while, of like doing that jokey wink tease of like, oh, we know stuff that you don't know, but like, hopefully people got a kick out of the slight ribbing that we would subtly throw to Jeff and Kyle every once in a while.
There are some times where it just an opportunity presents itself.
Yes, exactly. Sutton says, do you think they'll manage to make Cat-She? No, I want to double check that. Not suck in the coming games. And then TheSmak writes in and says, hey, I like Kate Sith. I'm excited to see how they do it. I think it's going to be really fun to see. And honestly, like knowing how different everybody plays, I really want to know what the gameplay is going to be like for that beast.
Yeah. And what will they expand upon in the second one? I think is going to be really exciting to find out.
Well, yeah.
What if they go the Red 13 route and he's just a NPC party?
Well, I think that was just because it was so late. So hopefully
That's what I
second game doesn't cut off, right when you get the character or something like that. But
here's a question I have for you guys that I want to know what you think about. When like going forward, do you think that they are going to continue doing the predetermined party members at different points, or are they going to let you like PHS people in and out?
I think it's going to
be the latter.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's going to be predetermined for a while, though. I feel like they're going to be so insistent on storytelling, and it works so well. And the idea of writing that many more variables, I think, is just almost a deal breaker for them, right?
Yeah, I feel like before playing this game, I would have felt very strongly that I would have the PHS system in there. And then how I saw that they had implemented it in this version, now I'm less married to the idea of switching out party members. Do I want it? Yeah, I totally do. But I don't think I'll be heartbroken if it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Where are you at, Joe?
I mean, that's sort of the same camp I'm in. I actually think, as much as I like the freedom of being like, okay, this is my party. These are the people I'm going to use for the whole game. I think what you see in this game, and you've seen in other Final Fantasy games in the past, is they by giving you certain party members to work with, they actually force you to use different strategies, different approaches to combat. When you're just as Tifa and Aerith, the way you play is a little different than when you are Cloud and Barrett out, exploring the drum or whatever, right? And I think games like Final Fantasy IV does that really well too. Like it almost imposes these limitations on you by giving you certain party members with certain capabilities. So then it kind of forces you to explore other avenues of combat, different abilities, things that you wouldn't do if you just sort of have your 3 standby characters that you stick with all the time.
Yeah.
And there were
But one thing they did really well was not make any characters terrible to play this time around.
Oh, yeah.
They made Aerith a powerhouse, which is the polar opposite of what she was in the original.
Yeah.
Oh, God, as soon as you get Ray of Judgment, right?
Yeah.
You're just blasting everything with it.
Yeah, somebody wrote in last week. Sorry we didn't get to it, I don't believe, but they were talking about just how different it feels to equip materia to characters in the remake and not feel a weight of guilt about like, oh, if I equip this summon, their HP is going to go down so much. Like not penalizing players for trying out different materia builds as much as the original game, which is a subtle point that like it's much more liberating to be like, yeah, whatever, slap some summons on this character, I'm not going to feel terrible about it.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love that. Yeah, because you like I had Cloud always is just like the strongest character and give him the purple materia or the blue materia, but like I never wanted to give him magic because it would just take down his strength, it'd take down his HP. And it's just like, just give it to somebody else then.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever go back and get Bahamut?
I did not.
No.
I haven't.
So many people wrote in talking about how much they're loving hard mode and the endgame stuff that I know at some point I'll go back to it. And I don't know if it's...
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's probably going to be like before the end of the year debates, just as a refresher. That seems like a really nice time to jump back into it and try and mop some of this stuff up and just remember how much I love this game. Just to make sure it's
3 nominations.
Lego Star Wars is looking pretty strong, Ronnie. So, really, it's anybody's game at this point. Joe, we thought of doing something. Hopefully you still have it written down somewhere, Grant, and maybe Ronnie. No pressure if you don't. But we thought it'd be fun to look back at the remake in its entirety here and figure out the best part of the gameplay, worst part of the gameplay, best part of the story, worst part of the story. As a big capper. Grant's looking at the ceiling, trying to find his notes.
I have to go to the bathroom.
Do you remember him, Grant?
No.
Do you want to do this segment, Grant?
Sure.
Okay, great. Joe, did something stand out? Let's go with gameplay. Best part of the gameplay for you, if you had to boil it down to one specific thing.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a few minutes ago, but I think the best part gameplay-wise for me is the character swap mechanic, and that works because they make all of the characters feel so unique when you're controlling them.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I'm with you, because so much of the fun for me is the story in this game, but I'm thinking like, when was I most enthralled by the combat? And if I had to boil it down, it is going on that early mission with Tifa to go beat up the freaks, outside Sector 7 slums. Where it's just like that first moment of controlling Tifa and really understanding how her combat is different. That made me like the peak gameplay moment of like, this is so fun. I love just boosting Tifa and then letting her rip,
Yeah. And then you set Tifa as party leader and you're set for the game.
I didn't do that, but I probably should have at that point. Ronnie, can you think of like most fun or best part of the gameplay for you?
It's hard not to just say like just combat overall. It was absolutely fantastic. I love the idea how dynamic and versatile every character would play, but then also like even within that, you can give Barrett melee weapons and you can give him long range weapons. You can make any character that you want be your primary damage dealer through magic. You can make maybe not Aerith, but everybody just seems so like versatile that I love playing around with all the different weapons. I love those little skill sets you would get, and that they also weren't really difficult to get. Like you didn't have to like drag them out for 5 hours to get their skill.
And I love that it wasn't like AP where it's like experience based. I love there's just a matter of like
you
just
just do
use it
it
like 6 times or so. You're basically good. Yeah.
Yeah. And they were all like, they felt good. Most of them felt good. Most of them felt fun.
Yeah.
I loved Cloud's latest one, his last one, the Counter-Strike, I think it was just called, or
that one's great.
Counter-Strike. I love,
or Counter Stance, maybe, I don't remember.
something like that. I love that so much.
Hey, Ronnie, my favorite part of this discussion so far is every time the fan blows over to you and blows against the mic, is there any way you can kill that fan? I know it looks sweet, but...
What are you talking about?
Grant, does it stand out for you?
Hey, Ben, are my dogs snoring coming through?
Oh, maybe that's what I'm hearing. I thought it was
Is that
the
what
fan.
that was? Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's those dogs. Wake those puppies up. Wake them up like
So
the
it's not even my
Marlene, your
fan?
parrot running home. No, turn your fan on higher, and and Joe, make your dogs go into REM sleep, please.
I don't know what I can do about that.
Just shake them. Just shake them violently.
Give me a second.
Pull on their tail.
In the meantime, Grant, you got a favorite gameplay moment?
Yeah, I just had combat in general written down. I think they built upon the systems that they had laid down in 15 so well and made it such a dynamic and fun thing to do in this game, to the point that as a kid I did not like Aerith because I just wanted my strong party, and she was shoehorned into your party. Her attacks were just meaningless. The fact that they could make me like her more by making the combat so dynamic in this game is a testament to the system that they put in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think the worst part of the gameplay. I think it was my rock bottom was the Chocobo finding quest. Just when I've been doing a lot of those chapter 14 side quests, and then that one pops up, and it's like, I don't know where this last Chocobo is. I truly do not care. Damn you, game, for forcing
You
me.
didn't find Choki?
That's just fatigue for you, though. Like that was you trying to power through and wanting to hit a deadline.
I don't know. There's only 1 week, I think, where I was really dying. So I think I had a little wiggle room. It wasn't a, Red Dead 2 epilogue situation, Joe, where I was desperately trying to finish it in one night and cursing it, even though it is very good.
This stupid house. This is the worst part
I
of this
hate the
game.
house. And now in this game, they redeem houses. All right, worst part of the gameplay. Is
every
anybody
game
else?
is a hell house, right?
It's true. Somebody else have a thought on the worst part of the gameplay for him? The absolute low moment?
Yeah. The worst part for me is the system they have for the bosses and their health, where you hit certain thresholds and they become invincible, but you don't know when that's going to happen. It resets their stagger gate. Like that is, in my mind, gameplay wise, that is the number one thing that needs to get fixed.
It is
the next game.
Outrageous. I'm sure they debated it plenty on the team, but it's just that idea. I just want to barge in there and be like, do you know how frustrating this is going to be for every person playing your game? You will make people hate this story sequence. Whatever you're saving is going to be just ruined because everyone's going to be so pissed.
Yeah. Right.
I think it would have felt so much better if, let's say that like there's a scripted sequence when a boss hits half health. Instead of having it be one health bar that stops at half health, just give him multiple health bars, right? Like you fight Reno until his health bar is gone, and then it initiates a story scene, and then you fight again. I mean, I'm not saying that's the ideal solution, but I'm saying I think just that visual difference in this game would have fixed, or if not fixed it, would have made it.
I hear you, but what's the
way less frustrating?
What's the downside of letting you do as much damage as you would have? Like you start the second phase of that boss fight, which is tougher with the boss at 42% health instead of 50. It's like, who the hell cares in the long run? Unless they're worried about people breaking it.
You could even cheat that system by saying like, yeah, it's at 42% health, but secretly they just got buffed up like the HP, but now it just goes down a little bit slower.
Look, we ain't designers. I'm sure they had their reasons. I think it's just emphasizing the story or prioritizing story, but what are you going to do? Okay, so that's the worst part. Other people have thoughts on the worst part of the gameplay?
For me, it's having to hold triangle to do simple actions.
Really?
Yeah, I hate it.
Like high fives?
That sequence going through the robot arms was not my favorite part to begin with, and then having to hold triangle to do a clunky missed high five just was like the cherry on top.
All right. Any holding? Ronnie, can you think of a specific moment?
I just think like it's like mock platforming. Like
Yeah.
any time that it's just like, ooh, you got to jump here. Better press triangle.
Edge of your seat, buddy.
Okay. Yeah.
That
just seems.
Oh, sorry, Dave. Runner-up for me is getting interrupted when using an ATB meter and having it not be replenished. Just a wasted action.
Yes.
Getting knocked down, interrupted, anything. That's frustrating.
Limit breaks too.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Or having my limit break just be a little bit out of range where it's like, I didn't know where that character was. I assumed they were close, so I just told Tifa to hit it, and it's a little bit too far away. It's like, God. I guess that's on me for not really taking the time to make sure everybody is within. But I just want like a visual indicator of the range.
Right. Yeah. You could just like highlight the monster red, but just says like, yep, this thing's in range.
Yes, something
Honestly,
like that.
Those should be rangeless. Like they should sprint up to do the attack. Like anything.
Yeah. Best part of the story. So this is tricky. Oh, yes.
I'll say. Shinra Tower, and most notably the museum history tour for me. Honestly, that's the high point.
I know. I think I might be with you. I think about my peak excitement in the game, and I think it was seeing the airship in that video with the ancient thing. But that's barely a story beat. It's so small. It's like if I had to really think about it too, I think it might even go back earlier, and this is so stupid, but just that moment when I realized how much they're adding to these just stock characters that I love from Avalanche. And it's like the scene with Wedge talking to you about Jessie and just being like, hey, it's all an act with her. Like, she's not really like this. Life's a play and the world's her stage. Whatever that like that entire sequence where he's just like, hey, Jessie, like, she's great, but like, don't take this seriously. I love just that extra layer of depth there. And I think those two were my peak excitements for the story in Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I did not see coming.
Yeah.
Well, and going back to the museum and smaller characters too, I think this does a great job of rectifying one of the problems from the original game, which is all of those Shinra executives like Palmer and Scarlet and stuff who, when you're playing the original game, it's just, you're left thinking like, who are these people and why, what are they in charge of? Okay, so they're at Shinra. What does that mean? And there are parts in the remake very specifically geared towards teaching you, this is Palmer.
Yeah.
He's Space Division. And I really appreciated that, and making those, from an early phase, making those Shinra characters be more memorable.
Yeah, I remember even, playing the original and being like, Palmer and Heidegger, they were almost interchangeable in my mind. I'm like, which one got hit by the truck again? But now it's like, okay, very clearly laid out. One's quivering and loves tea and crapping his pants while seeing Sephiroth in a hall. I got it. Yeah. It's perfect. Ronnie, can you think of best part of the story for you?
Well, maybe not coming across as like best part of the story, because I think I would say probably the same, that museum was just, it was everything that I would want as like a longtime Final Fantasy VII nerd is just like, well, let's learn a little bit more about Shinra and the Cetra, and that was just amazing. But one thing that I really, really, really appreciated was just the friendship and like the growing friendship between Tifa and Aerith. I really liked like how that played out, because there was always like the question. I think you and I, Ben, had chatted about this a little bit while we were playing maybe it was the Final Fantasy VII, like the original, up through Midgar.
The stream we did.
I think we had talked about like what do you think that like friendship was like? Was it like kind of frenemy, or were they just kind of like just like friends by just proximity? And it does totally seem like, at least to me, that like Tifa really took to Aerith. And I liked how that all played out.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Here's a related question on that. My impression of the original game was that, okay, so there's a love triangle there, but I remember Aerith being presented much more as like the girlfriend. And I have a different vibe in Remake, and I wonder if you guys did also, or do you feel like that's sort of the way it's working?
The girlfriend in what sense? What do you mean?
like more the love interest?
Exactly. It's like, so there's that potential there with Tifa in the original, but I feel like the way they present Aerith is to make players think like, this is the girl that Cloud's going to get together with.
Yeah.
And there's
even
like
that moment.
I feel like that's flipped for the remake.
Well,
yeah, I kind of feel the same way. There is that one moment that feels very in place and expected at that moment, but now in retrospect, it does feel a little bit out of place. Was like when Cloud had fallen through the church and they were working their way through Sector 5, and then they get to the playground. Cloud sits on one side of that little playground thing.
Cat bubble.
Mhm.
Cat bubble. And then like Aerith sits down and then she scoots as close as she can to him. Which kind of I feel like that's symbolic of just like I want to get to know you a little bit better, and Cloud seems a little bit more standoffish. And then like now that I played the game, like that almost feels a little bit out of place.
Yeah.
Like Aerith is kind of the one that's more distant and just like we have other things to do.
Well, maybe she's just so taken by their adventure in the early stages before she gets kidnapped and her life gets more sincerely in danger. But I wonder, Joe, you talk about like that being flipped. I wonder if it's just a matter of perspective and who you go on the date with, right? In the field here. Because I had Tifa there, and so I felt like, okay, Tifa's the primary target here, whereas in the original it seemed like it was leaning towards Aerith, and then once Aerith was out of the picture, then it was like, all right, now we can really get to know Tifa on a deeper level with her probing your brain and making love on a hill.
Sweet love.
Yeah. Well,
They just made out.
Oh, that's right. For 6 hours.
I think the analog to the date in Final Fantasy VII Remake is, I think, my favorite part of the story. So I got the platinum in this game, which means going through and seeing all 3 of the different scenes for the different characters in there. And
Yeah.
no matter who you get, it's great. Like it is a real payoff. For me, it was the big payoff moment story-wise, whether you've got that Aerith dream where she's saying like, no matter what, do not fall in love with me.
Yeah. Which
Tifa
again,
had-
like goes back to like this feels kind of weird, right? I mean, like based on like she seemed to be the primary love interest, but now you're having this dream sequence with her where she's saying like, no.
Don't. Yeah. Nojima had an interesting take in that Ultimania interview. In the meantime, Ronnie, do you want to turn off your fan? Because it seems to be still blowing on your microphone. So Nojima said, in Tifa's scene in the flower field, I wanted Cloud to not look cool in this scene. Even though Cloud and Tifa are close in age, he has a 5-year blank slate, and he doesn't have enough life experience to consider himself an adult. Even though most of the characters are around 20 years old, there's one guy, Cloud, who has the mentality of a 16-year-old, and that person tries to be like an adult. After the Sector 7 plate fell, Barrett comforted Tifa with the temperament of an adult, and Cloud saw that and wanted to do the same thing for her in the flower scene, but it didn't go as planned. I wanted to try writing him as being awkward. I love that so much. Obviously, it's so stupid to be like, Nojima really knows these characters. Like, yeah, he effing wrote them. But I love that idea of like, yeah, Cloud's 20, but I mean, has the mentality of a 16-year-old. Just showing like where he's at in his emotional growth, I think is so beautifully put, and I love that it came through in that scene. Worst part of the story. Look, we don't need to dwell on this, but I think for me it was the ghost in the train yard. Thank you. I think that's still like the dumbest crap. But
that did suck. Yeah, that was dumb. He just wanted to play.
Yeah. Or Wedge's death, I think, was piss poor. But who knows what they're doing.
Or the entire ending.
Yeah, no, I think it was the ghost saying thank you. Pretty confident on that. Is there anything else pop for anybody else?
I also had the expanded train graveyard sequence as well. Everything is pushing you to get to the plate, and you dick around with ghosts for 2 hours in a train graveyard.
Right.
And runner up for me is not being able to play Red 13. I get it was late in the game. It would take you 3 minutes to learn how to play a character, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But take them a lot longer to develop it, I'm sure.
Right.
I don't care about that. Spend the money.
Well, yeah.
But I mean, he has a moveset. He has a limit break even, right?
Yeah,
Like,
he does. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's confusing. Should we jump into some questions here?
Yeah.
Comments? Great. Robert
Let's
George
do it.
says, general question on the addition of the whispers and other changes from the original. Do you get the sense that they're making these major changes just for the sake of it being different from the 1997 game? If a story is compelling, it doesn't seem like it needs to be different when you tell it again. I think there's a certain amount of it, and maybe this is too dev focused, but I still come from that vantage point of I want them to be interested in making the remake. I want them to have passion about making this remake, and so, if they're bored with the story, but I'm excited to have it twisted. So I don't think it's just changes for the sake of changes. I think, if you want to get into the layer of fate representing fan expectations, I like that they're dealing with some new emotions and trying to tread some new ground here.
Yeah, if they can create, I feel like if they can create some uncertainty in longtime fans, that's mission accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Ben, I think that they talked about this when we were at Square for Final Fantasy 15.
Yeah.
But the idea of the people making this game being the people that made the original game, wanting to keep this content interesting for them as creators, but also for gamers who would essentially, if you're retelling the same story, only be fueled by nostalgia for the original.
And they'd have nothing to do.
And how far can that carry you?
Yes, and they'd have nothing to do but get more and more nitpicky about this has changed, this has changed, this is different. Whereas this remixed version, sequel, if you want to call it that, I think is a really smart avenue to alleviate belly aching and keep people on the edge of their toes.
Yeah. I think you're dooming yourself or I think they would have doomed themselves if they were just we are retelling it, but with better graphics. Because while I think that would have been satisfying to a certain subset of fans, at some point, you're never going to hit the same levels, hit the same notes that the time and place of the original, it's just not going to sing in the same way anymore.
It won't.
And
yeah.
And then you're gonna have the point of just well, then why? It's going to get to a space where people are wondering why did they change that word? I remember when we were talking about the death scene where Tifa was standing over her father. I remember having this moment where she says, "I'm sick of all of it," and I thought no, the line is "I hate them all," which I thought was so much stronger. But now in retrospect of what all that they've changed, I don't really give a damn about that anymore.
Right.
You know, so.
The amount of this game that they recreated on a 1-to-1,
yeah,
honestly was enough of the nostalgia, fresh coat of paint that I needed, I guess. I didn't need to play the entire game with this perfect polish. I think going off the rails a little bit probably is the smart choice here too.
Yeah, and I kept.
What if it's going out of the rails a lot of it? Moving forward, it'd be okay.
I think I got what I needed. Just seeing these characters and portions of Midgar in the early story in what it looks like in your head versus the 12 polygons that it actually was on the screen.
Yeah. There's definitely a lingering part of me where obviously I'm excited to play the upcoming games, but I think I kind of have a resignation. I think they're going to be good. I don't think they're going off the rails in a terrible way, but at the same time, it's I think the best is behind us when it comes to the wow, they did it Final Fantasy remake discussion and emotions. Nothing can beat even just those first 4 chapters and how over the moon I was.
Oh, I think they can.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How so?
Yeah, there's so many. Well, there are so many big moments that even if you know the scope and maybe even the approach of which it's coming, once you see it, I think there are going to be some moments in there that are just going to blow us all out of the water. Even though we know that it's coming.
Hearing the new orchestration for Sid's theme is probably going to rock my world, but I don't know if it can hit the highs of for the first time just being what? They have multiple versions of the Mako reactor background music?
I think musically you're totally right. They can't do any better than this. They can stay on par with it, and I hope that they do.
There is one thing coming up that I now have faith that they're going to do, and that is Red 13 dancing in a little sailor suit.
Yes!
Yeah.
They're going to do it!
Out the back.
Yep, they're going to do it.
Do you think they're going to go up another level? There's freaks and monsters in this world, so I guess it wouldn't be absurd to see a cat dog in a suit. But do you think they'll do like a Ninja Turtles thing and put like a human face over him or something just to try and make it?
I hope not.
No. You're not going to make it psychopathic.
Just wear the skin suit real quick, Red 13. It'll be sweet. But yeah, like playing the...
I found somebody's skin.
Sweet. Remember to smile.
You still got that?
I playing through the ending, I kept having this debate of, are they doing this because it's the story they want to tell, or are they making these changes to the ending to give fans what they expect? Are they realizing, God, we need to get Sephiroth in here, we gotta have Zack in here, so let's shoehorn them in for the sake of the story? And the more that I've soaked in that idea of a time-traveling Sephiroth, the safer I feel in that it is more interesting than just, we feel like Sephiroth should be in there, so let's throw him in there. Joe, there was a comment on your spoiled video over there at Game Informer, and I think it was the top comment on the YouTube channel, and I thought, this crystallizes things perfectly, which just said, Sephiroth is playing New Game Plus with Remake, like from the original game. And I love that perspective on it. Yeah. I do think that is what's going on here. So should we just break down the evidence that this is a time-traveling Sephiroth?
If you have that evidence collected, you okay. Go at it.
I mean, so there's something that people are harping on is like the black feathers, the black one wing thing. Like that only appears in Advent Children. And at first I was like, that's just like a cool Sephiroth design that they're pulling in. I get that. But there are a lot of black feathers. They do emphasize it throughout so much of the remake that it's not just like, oh, it's just his design. The fact that they're using that to seed it in conjunction with other things. But trying to figure out what Sephiroth wants was really stumping me so much the last time around. And now with this one, the idea being that Sephiroth, post-Advent Children, cannot die and has come back in, and now the Whispers are trying to course correct because they realize that something's wrong with the timeline. And so, the way they described it, I believe in the Easy Allies video, is it's like the antibodies of the body trying to get rid of this virus that is Sephiroth because something isn't right. And that lines up so well with what Aerith is saying throughout the remake of just like, something's different. This isn't going right. We need to try and fix this. He's not acting the way he should be because Aerith also very much seems to be in the know of the future. But my read of it is that she's only in the know for the canonical future. And so when things go haywire, that's why she's a little freaked out at the end of the game.
That's how I read it too, is that like, there's this moment where she's noticing that something is awry here that is completely unaccountable. Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of evidence too, before Joe can open his mouth, I mean, the bizarre moment at the edge of creation at the end, trying to figure out what's going on there. The way Sephiroth is phrasing things, the fact that he blocks all of Omnislash and says, not this time. Then there's even that moment in the beginning in chapter 2 when Cloud's like, I killed you with my own hands. And Sephiroth, somebody brought it up and he has a good line where he's just like, oh, you don't need to remind me, Cloud. So like those types of little nods that like, hey, I'm very hip as to exactly what's going on here. And then you could even tie it out further than that, if you really want to, with that idea of like, why is Cloud seeing visions of the future? Is it through his connection with Sephiroth? All that stuff is filtering down. Maybe that's another system to let him see these future events. Maybe that's coming from Aerith. Joe, where are you at with future Sephiroth?
I don't think my opinion has changed in the last hour or so.
Yeah.
I don't know that I don't know for sure that he is from the future. I think that you are dealing with, breaking it down to things we know and things we don't know for sure. I think we can say for sure that we know this is not the canonical Sephiroth that we are familiar with.
Yes.
Because
this is
the Final Fantasy VII, the original Final Fantasy VII Sephiroth.
Right. I think it's safe to say that Sephiroth's body is still encased in Mako doing its thing.
Yes.
Probably.
Well, I mean, is it interacting in some ways? Is it like still the force that's going to Shinra HQ, stuff like that?
Possibly. I guess all I'm saying is I don't think the timeline prior to this has really changed much. So things that happened in the past in the original game, I think still happened in the past in this game.
So that's implying that there are two Sephiroths.
So I think, so the Sephiroth that we're dealing with at the end of Remake, I don't know if that's from the future. I don't know if that's at any rate, it is some enlightened version of the character that is trying to interfere with the current events of the remake.
Right. And the weird thing too, there's something that really I was confused about is in a lot of spoiler discussions, they talk about, Sephiroth, he's just messing with Cloud. He's messing with Cloud. He's still trying to use Cloud, confuse Cloud. I think that's all accurate. But the part where it's like, and then that part in chapter 2 where he talks about how he needs the planet, needs to protect the planet. That's just Sephiroth messing with people. Where it's like, I don't think so at all. I mean, maybe I'm being tricked by Sephiroth, but I think the enlightened Sephiroth is realizing that the planet is in danger or in some way wants to protect the planet, which is throwing off Aerith, throwing off so much. But in terms of what's different with this Sephiroth, that discussion in chapter 2, I think is pretty telling when he's like, hey, this planet's in danger, and if it goes, I go and you go, and we can't have that happen.
Yeah. What does he mean when he tells Cloud to run away then?
That is the weird part. This is the type of stuff that I've been staying awake at night thinking about, Joe, is like, does that line up? Why would he want him to run away? Well, he just would not want Cloud to go, because if Cloud goes through with his normal actions of Final Fantasy VII, he's still killing a Sephiroth, so maybe he doesn't want that to happen, because he also is inviting Cloud to kill Destiny and kill Fate, so therefore maybe his other Sephiroth form will also survive.
Does he tell him to run away? Isn't that before he meets Aerith for the first time?
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't he be trying to alter that so he doesn't end up meeting her?
That is
the only person who would have the power to stop him.
Yes. That is certainly a theory. The Aerith stuff gets so bizarre trying to figure out what she knows, and people brought up early on too that idea that Joshua Caleb says when Aerith is kneeling down to the leaking Mako pipe, the main Final Fantasy VII theme is playing, then suddenly she's startled out of her reverie by something in the original. She has calmly stood up, and the beginning of Sephiroth's theme starts playing. Aerith runs out of the alley looking behind her as if she's chased by something. It is true that opening cutscene is more different from the original than we ever really commented on. I think the solution is that she's seeing the whispers. Like, we can't see them yet. From our perspective, she hasn't touched Cloud yet, however you want to interpret that, but it seems like she's running from something, and it seems like the whispers are the natural thing, since she's kind of freaked out and being swarmed with them by the time we see her as well later on. But okay, the Sephiroth stuff, Joe, this is where I go off the rails. But that idea of Sephiroth, do you buy that he's worried about the planet, that something has made him freaked out about the planet?
Boy, I mean, when I think about the things that they can do going forward to surprise us with that character, I think that one of the biggest surprises that they could throw is that Sephiroth is in fact not the main villain.
I think that's exactly where this is going. And it's even like things like at the end of the amazing Cetra set piece, when they show like the meteor and everything like that. I mean, this is, again, probably reading the tea leaves a little bit too much, but there's that shot where it's like Sephiroth and Cloud back to back as Meteor is tearing Midgar apart. And it is like one of those things like, if you really want to read into that, it is a weird framing of that. If I may throw out my theory, Joe.
Do it.
I think it's going to be that there are more Genova species landing or threatening to destroy Earth. Like, what would be more satisfying than, there's not just one calamity of the sky. Sephiroth knows that this is coming again. Or in the future, this is going to be a contender, and so he wants to protect this. He wants to protect the planet so that he can be the ultimate being. And if he has to then team up with Cloud to defeat the original timeline Sephiroth, like, I could totally see that being a contender too. Like, this guy's an idiot, let's take him out because there's a bigger threat here. I think that would be an interesting story to tell, and I would not put it past them.
The thing about that, though, if that's true, and your time travel Sephiroth theory is correct.
Yeah.
The last thing that we know about Sephiroth's goals from Advent Children is that he wants to sail the universe with that planet as his vessel and just like crash and destroy other things. So like the idea that there's that he's some sort of benevolent savior, if he's that Sephiroth, I think doesn't line up.
Well, he needs the planet either way, right? Not that he's benevolent, but just that like, he's
he still
Vegeta.
needs his little toy, I suppose. Like the only thing that Aerith really knows is that like his primary intention is not the well-being of the planet. So whatever he's going towards, that's not the thing that he's particularly worried about. But that does open up a lot of different things about like, well, what exactly is his angle here?
Yeah, and it's the weird thing too, where like, a lot of people are confused about why are the good guys trying to defeat fate, which is also kind of like Earth. And I think that's interesting, juicy stuff that they can get into the sequel of like, okay, you want to protect mankind, but are you really on the Earth side here or not? Because if the Earth's goal and Destiny's goal is ultimately get rid of humans, which is the 500 years in the future, if you want to have that read that Earth is just, or that humanity's been wiped out, which Katase in an interview with EGM back in 2005 said that like, oh yeah, that's where it's going, is Earth wants to get rid of humans because it's the only way to keep itself safe, right? So if there's that, then there's also the confusing thing of why they constantly have these visions of meteor and the destruction. And I think that is Sephiroth messing with them, showing the meteor, showing the destruction of Midgar to try to convince them that they need to defeat fate because they're only seeing the bad parts of the future. If Sephiroth would have shown them a vision of the future, which was everybody living hunky-dory after Aerith saves everybody with holy, I think it'd be a little bit different. But every vision of the future is like this catastrophic version. And I think that's all in Sephiroth's ploy to get them to defeat fate so that the chains are off and that we can really let this rodeo begin with his new plans.
And his new plans being?
That's the question. I have no idea. I mean, there's the thing of like, okay, he still is using Cloud. He still wants Cloud to deliver black materia to him, to his other self, or his other self still wants this, and this other Sephiroth is in a whole other world.
So you guys touched on this a little bit in the last episode, but I think it bears repeating that the Sephiroth that we see in the Shinra Tower, as he's doing all the stuff we know he's going to do when he goes and takes Genova's body and goes up and...
Yeah.
I mean, my read on that, and I think you guys echoed this a little bit too, is that it seems almost like he's playing a part in a play rather than actively fulfilling some sort of desire of his, right?
Oh, I noticed the play stuff with other characters, but what do you mean by Sephiroth?
I guess I did not get the sense in that he was enacting the will of the Sephiroth of that time frame. Like
he didn't think that this was the be all end all, like the only way that in order to reach his prerogative is to do these things. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess to me it felt like he knew that in order to make Destiny travel a particular path, Sephiroth needed to infiltrate Shinra Tower, needed to get Jenova, and needed to kill the president. And that's why he was doing those things, rather than Sephiroth saying, these are the things I need to do for my own ascension to power here.
But what makes you think that that's not just our original Sephiroth, our boy Sephiroth? I'm trying to remember if he has any super cryptic dialogue there, more than the normal amount of cryptic dialogue from Sephiroth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure. Like the major distinction there, I think, is that other party members can see him there.
So maybe I'll ask a really stupid question here,
Please.
But this is just like the elementary place that I'm at right now. Like, if we're thinking that this Sephiroth that was, in Shinra Tower is sort of operating, and then there's one that's also communicating with Cloud in this sort of meta way.
Yeah.
Is the Cloud, or is the Sephiroth that is walking around Shinra Towers, is that Sephiroth aware of meta Sephiroth?
I would guess no.
Okay.
But I don't know.
That would be really interesting. That's really interesting.
I think so. I've sort of bought into the theory. Again, this goes into theory and not evidence, but like
Yeah.
I've bought into the theory of a sort of unified consciousness Sephiroth.
Okay, I think that's very fun.
Yeah, like the thing that just like anything that's been touched by Genova or has Genova cells in it is sort of this one organism living among many organisms kind of a thing.
Right. So I think in that Ultimania interview, even they talked that there are essentially like 4 kinds of Sephiroth that you're interacting with in the game. You're interacting with a memory of Sephiroth, an illusion of Sephiroth, a physical manifestation of Sephiroth, which is like your neighbor in the slums.
Yeah.
And a 4th kind that I think is this generally mysterious from the future, the one that you're interacting with like down at the end of the highway.
Can we just call that one Bizarro Sephiroth?
Yes, we can. That sounds great.
You forgot about Bizarro Sephiroth. Yeah.
My name is Dan Wrights, and it says, could someone just tell me if I ever interacted with the real Sephiroth at any point during this game? No. But the real one's just hanging out in his little cocoon. Come over here.
I mean, unless it's also possible that whatever this like weirdo bizarro Sephiroth is that's floating around may have already interfered with the Sephiroth that's on the planet. He might not still be encased in Mako if he's been freed by himself from a different timeline or reality or whatever.
Yeah, if he was trying to guide Cloud towards that stuff anyway, why wouldn't he just go pick up the black materia? Well, I guess that's complicated. Like he could go pick it up and give it to himself?
There's the question of just like whether or not that this old Bizarro meta Sephiroth like actually has the ability to affect things physically, or if he's just like a psychological thing.
Couldn't he use Marco and Narco to go pick it up?
They weren't in the mood.
Okay.
We're busy. So the Sephiroth gets so confusing, and this is something from the Drop Frame spoiler cast, but in the Nojima book, Once Upon a Smile, is that what the name of those books are? Anyways, that's where Leslie and there's a bunch of other fun stuff in there. But in there's this quote where it is Sephiroth from before Advent Children, technically. And it's his thoughts as he enters the live stream. And it's fascinating because it's called the live stream black and live stream white. And the live stream white is Aerith's perspective of like, well, I could absorb myself into the live stream or I could come back. I have a bunch of choices, but she feels Sephiroth's presence and then Sephiroth feels her presence. And so here's the quote from Lifestream Black, which is a book written by Nojima. So it's, quote, "As long as Cloud remembers me," this is Sephiroth, "I can continue to exist within the life stream and on the surface. Even if my spirit disseminates, even if just one fragment of a memory courses around the planet, in the end, I can count on Cloud's consciousness to bring me back," the man thought. So that's that higher level, very fun to think about thing of, is that where this remake has to go, is just to eliminate Sephiroth and the mimetic legacy of Sephiroth that we have to shatter Cloud's skull just to like get rid of this possibility so that Sephiroth has no way of popping back into the world?
Cloud, you have to drown yourself in the ocean.
Okay, bye then. I don't think he'd mind.
Is that Bugenhagen telling Cloud to go kill himself?
I believe so. I mean, it's been discussed too, but I do think that's going to be a huge thing in the sequel is like, when we're confused, Bugenhagen's going to be like, oh, here's some exposition for you. Like, here's a little bit more of what's happening. I think there's something to that.
I cannot wait to see my boy Bugen.
Yeah.
I hope
floating
it's just
around on his ball.
I hope it's just one green texture again, just no explanation of what he is on.
No, I want somebody to be like, what's the ball?
There's a whole side mission. I've lost my ball. It's broken up into 4 parts. Can you go find it?
It broke into 3 pieces.
Oh, hell.
The point where Ben's like, no, I'm not doing that.
Remake sucks. There's also the weird thing with Sephiroth too that I'm trying to figure out is what Aerith is talking about on the highway, where it's weird that so much of the pivotal moments in this game just happen on a highway. But when Aerith is talking about how like the Whispers are the planet, you know, that connection between the life stream and the Whispers, it seems like it's all just nature if you want to really zoom out, right? And she has that section where she talks about like how that can't touch Sephiroth. It can't affect Sephiroth. And so that's that weird thing of like, is Sephiroth using you to kill fate because he can't interact with it, because he doesn't appreciate the joys of human existence and love. Therefore, he can't interact with pure love and life, which is the lifestream / fate. Judging from these faces, I'm getting an agreeable tone.
I mean, I think there's something to be said for the fact that the life stream, at least in the original game, we know as a healing force that can like root out in its own infection and heal its own damage.
Right.
So I think if you look at the planet's will like that, I think it would probably view Sephiroth as, a cancer to be cleansed.
So that's why Sephiroth can't kill fate on his own, because he can't interact with it, or because some people think that he's already in charge, which I think is going a little bit too far. But his interaction, his relationship with fate is still something that I'm trying to wrap my brain around.
Yeah, no, I
because she talks about she's like, oh, love and the planet and life. It's like duck off a water's back with this dude. Remember, she has that whole sequence where she talks about that.
Right. Yeah. It's a new thought for me. It's just like, well, wait a second. And this tells you kind of like where I am in sort of digesting this whole story, particularly the ending as a whole. Like, I haven't had a great opportunity to just formulate my own thoughts because it is so, I feel like it is so dense and complex, and you can go so many different ways with it. Yeah. So.
But that's no fault of yours either, because as much fun as I'm having, like I love talking about this game. I love throwing around theories and dissecting this stuff. But I think at some level we have to acknowledge that the fact that there's a difference between speculation based on like solid evidence and speculation that's just primarily driven by just your own desire of where you want things to go. I think it comes down really to a failure of storytelling at the end of this game.
Failure or just good tease for where it's going to go in the future. I agree with you on this in the sense of, I would like to have had a stronger emotion towards the end, and it gets so convoluted. Yeah. It's like, okay, it's a lot to chew on. That I get, but I mean, is it a failure if we're trying to unpack this interesting story and where it could go, and we're excited about the future for years here?
I think for the kind of game this is. Sorry, go ahead, Ronnie. Yeah.
No, I think that's more of a testament to just how strong Final Fantasy VII is as a story as a whole, and fans will take, I think, anything right now. And not saying that they didn't give us anything, but we're in a space where we have a lot of time to try to figure out where this is going to go. And kind of to Joe's point, I'm not entirely sure if that the way that it was presented, particularly at the end, is particularly effective.
Think about going back to the Easy Allies podcast again. Yeah. They brought up an analogy to Bloodborne and the way you really have to dig into Bloodborne's lore and item descriptions and stuff to get a story out of that. I think the difference is that Bloodborne is a fun, atmospheric action game that you can completely appreciate on its own merits without having to look up what Rom the Spider is all about. I think you can have a satisfying self-contained experience there. I think the difference is that for Final Fantasy VII, for the remake, we are dealing with a narrative-driven, character-driven game. Those are the things that are, I mean, the combat is fun too, but the narrative and the characters that's what's bringing those fans back into this world. That's what's propelling us through the story. That's what's driving the nostalgia. And the fact that that's where they drop the ball at the end of the game, I think is the failure.
I don't think they dropped the ball in as much as they ran into the end zone with it and then said, that's all, folks. But there were 4 more football fields in front of them. It's a different case of Bloodborne of being this, one thing, whereas this, we knew going in that it's split up, So I think it's a different beast.
You mean to tell me, though, that you don't call it a failure of narrative when you are playing at the end of a 40-hour game, you are fighting the villain, and you do not know why you are fighting him, what he wants, or what you want.
Well, if you put it like that. I hear you, but I'd be so much more pissed if this was the finale. And I think that the tease and the mystery is worth a lot, even if it's not emotionally satisfying. I think it's maybe the smart play here.
We could look back after the next one, and they could have stuck the landing. I mean,
right.
We won't.
we won't know,
for
right?
certain, yeah.
Yeah,
Which I guess I see where you're coming from, Joe. But I can look at it in a couple ways. I guess like they could either have totally shit the bed, or they could have stuck it and nailed it a perfect 10 landing. We'll find out, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that depends on whether or not you've like. I guess I'm talking about it in the context of this as its own game, granted as part of a larger story, but also as its own experience. In the same way that something like Mass Effect 1 is a standalone game, but also part of a larger, arc.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly, the part that probably shouldn't be excused, so easily is like, Ben, you were talking about, well, this is your favorite game, and how at the end you felt kind of emotionally flat.
Yeah.
I think a better ending would have instilled that sense of mystery, but then also was able to summon at least some resonance of finality or emotion in you, where you weren't just like, ugh, I guess.
Yeah, and they try and rally and try to connect it so clearly for like, Aerith is like, we gotta go through here, we gotta fight fate, we gotta make things right, which is that confusing line of like, well, wait a minute, okay, who's on what side? So it's really just the planet wants the Cetra to exist and nobody else, and then it just so happens that in order to fight fate to save humanity, it's the good guys and then Sephiroth coming from two separate places to fight the same thing while not looking at each other for a little bit. It's confusing. Underachiever says, hey, you talked about this a little last episode, but who benefits from defeating the Whispers? Are Cloud and company being tricked into believing the future is bad, or is it implying the OG ending was the bad ending? I think they're more in the camp of being tricked into believing the future is bad, but I hope it goes in that direction of them trying to weigh that debate about what is ultimately good if it means it's bad for humans but good for the planet. Where are you at now, Barrett? I think that's going to be an interesting debate if they're willing to get into it, and I think they are. Yeah.
I think the question is it's just like, well, what exactly is the good ending? Because I had that same thought of just like, well, wait a second, like they're implying, and I never really thought about this, that like they're implying that it's the bad ending, like Final Fantasy VII, like left in a space that was just like,
it's not the
like
bad ending, it's the planet wins, Yeah,
so
like, is that the bad
like
ending?
Humans don't exist at the very end, and like I thought that was just like, well, that's the good ending. And now we're kind of thinking like, oh no, we need to make this a different ending, right? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, one part of that still doesn't make sense to me about that interpretation is the idea that you say they're being tricked into whatever the Whispers want is bad.
Yeah,
but this happens literally minutes after they see the Whispers resurrect Barrett after he's been stabbed through the chest.
Right.
So it's a little hard to believe that they fall hook, line, and sinker for like, oh, what the Whispers are trying to make happen is bad. Because like, well, my friend who was dead isn't anymore, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. In that EGM interview from 2005, by the way, the one where Katase says, here's how he just quotes it. He says, so EGM asks, at the very end of Final Fantasy VII, we see the epilogue to the whole story that takes place 500 years later. So really, you still have another 497 years worth of games and movies to fill in. And then Katase says, maybe I'll try to do that. In a way, I consider that epilogue to be the true happy ending of Final Fantasy VII. Well, it's a happy ending even though all the human beings are destroyed. And then he laughed, you guys. And then he laughed at us. But in that same interview, there's an interesting beat that I didn't know where Nomura said that originally with Final Fantasy VII, there were only 3 party members in the game. And it was Cloud, Barrett, and Aerith. And they knew
they were going to kill him.
Yeah, because they knew they wanted one to die. So it was between Barrett and Aerith. And so I love that idea that like they pay it off all those years later by having Barrett seem like he's going to die for 3 seconds at least,
Yeah.
Also in that EGM interview, there's a moment where they asked Nomura, which of Final Fantasy VII's women are you into? Mm-hmm. And he says, none. I'm not into super deformed women. It's like, cool. Thanks, buddy.
Okay.
He's more into Kate Sith.
Oh, absolutely. Doing that cute thrust.
Talking about the characters dying, though, I want to get your guys' read. Do you think that they are going to kill Aerith in a future installment?
Yes.
Yes.
I think so. And I think it's going to be one of those events too, like Midgar being surrounded by all the Whispers. I think this is going to be like, well, I guess if that's gone, maybe not. I was going to say that it will ripple through and that Aerith will die in every timeline and Zack will lose his mind, which we can get into, I guess. But I think they'll still kill her.
Sorry, Ben.
No.
Because people have more time than I do, the fact that people scrub through to find that it takes 7 seconds for Sephiroth to fall and kill Aerith, that I don't know if that's weird coincidence or if they really went there.
I think that's
weird,
a stretch. And like the thing that helps it a little bit, even though I said I'm not super into the music theory stuff, is the idea that City of the Ancients theme starts playing when he's talking about those 7 seconds. But I think that's internet spiraling. I think that is some cool Sephiroth stuff that will come back in a much later game, because this is Bizarro Sephiroth talking, and that's going to be something that ties into that, because it's very much like 7 seconds. He goes, time enough for you, perhaps. What will you do with it? And I think that's going to be something that he'll repeat later on that'll come in a cool moment as the Earth is being threatened. But, Joe, before you get to it, I want to point this out. Phoenix Rogue was saying that when replaying the game on hard, he noticed that in the chapter description for Chapter 18, it's called The Turning Point, and it says, quote, in the world beyond, Sephiroth shows Cloud a vision of the planet 7 seconds before its demise. I suppose this is the 7 seconds that Sephiroth is referring to during that dialogue.
Yeah. I mean, I think that 7 seconds is the seed they are planting for the next game, in the same way that, say, the whispers in this game are the primary big thing that is different about the story. I think whatever the 7 seconds is the remake's new layer that's getting folded into the story.
Right. But if you're seeing the destruction of the Earth and it's 7 seconds from now, and that's what Sephiroth's showing Cloud in that moment, that's where also I think of space. Then I think of space, I think of more Genova aliens. Just get Lavos in there. Let's connect these threads entirely. Let's go. So in that Ultimania interview, it says, after you defeat the last boss, Cloud and Sephiroth have a conversation with just the two of them. What was the meaning of that? I love how blunt that interview is. Nojima says, exactly what their conversation said. Actually, the lines that Sephiroth said in that scene were written during the beginning stages of production, where we did not know the exact placement of when they'll be delivered. So if that ties in, then in my mind, to them having a larger picture and knowing that that is where Sephiroth's ultimately going, I think it's just cool foreshadowing of some killer moment later on.
You know, it could just be metaphorical too. If it's the end of the world, it could be the ending of Cloud's world, and it really could just be Aerith being stabbed still.
That could be. And so you're a believer in the 7 second timeline of, it lines up.
I kind of am.
But that's such a weird way to frame it. I know they love the number 7. Obviously, they love the number 7 in these games. Which, by the way, do Lucky 7s exist? My Barrett HP got close, and I was thinking about trying it, but do we know?
I don't know.
Okay. I didn't test it.
Internet knows, I bet.
Yeah, but the idea that Sephiroth would tease that moment by the least interesting thing about it, like how long it took, like who gives a shit?
Well,
I don't know.
What exactly is he going to say, Ben? Sword and belly, what do you think?
Pro or con? I don't know. It just seems like it's never been a factor, and I don't think it's interesting. Like, what do we think that Sephiroth is hanging out on a ledge up top, being like, ready and now? It's like
1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000.
Yes.
Slow down the fall. Slow down the fall. Like, it's so silly. I think that's, yeah, I don't think that's the correct answer, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. But Aerith,
I don't think they're going to kill her.
You don't think so?
You know, that's fun.
Curveball.
No.
Yeah, I love it.
I think I think that is the one thing about this game that is so well known that, I mean, we talked before about not being able to deliver on nostalgia if you're telling the exact same story and you need some twists on it.
Yeah. I
think that there is no way that they can do that moment at this point. It's been so built up over the years, and everyone has pre-desensitized themselves to it, and they're crafting all kinds of story theories, presuming that it's going to happen.
Joe, what do you think about a scenario where Aerith is like adamant, where she knows what needs to happen, and she's like begging Cloud, I have to die there, and Cloud has to be the one to kill her?
I like that idea.
I mean, really,
cool.
like and Sephiroth is like working to unravel that timeline, and so maybe it doesn't happen by him, but maybe it happens by somebody else.
Well, the timeline's already unraveled. Yeah, it's that weird thing of just like maybe Sephiroth wouldn't stop because in the original, like Cloud, it almost kills her, and so maybe it's that weird thing of like if he's just not stopped, then goes through with it, and then Zack is like, "You SOB," you know, and then he comes up running from behind. Who knows?
Yeah.
Speaking of Zack, though, I think that's another example. I think that the dev team is maybe losing their nerve a little bit when it comes to these characters. Like all of the characters that you knew died didn't in this. Maybe, I guess Jesse is a maybe, and Wedge is a maybe. Biggs is alive for sure still. What was the other? Oh, and Zack.
I know you're horrified by Zack being alive, and a lot of people also had that same reaction in the comments of like, I don't trust this at all.
It's not even that I'm horrified about Zack being alive as much as my personal nervousness around trying to integrate a time travel / alternate world storyline into a game is.
Well,
those have to be handled, I feel like, really carefully, because it can just go off the freaking wall.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
are you suggesting that time travel in Final Fantasy VIII was not well handled?
What do you mean? Are you talking about my favorite character, Altai Misha?
I thought that was the interview we were reading from. The Zack stuff. Okay, so the stamp is a different breed of dog. Got that locked in. Something's going on here. But the part that I can't reconcile is Zack's timeline, the fact that he's alive now, very clear in that version of events. I can't reconcile that with the interesting line Aerith has, again, on the highway. She would not stop talking on that highway, where she said something like, if we go through there and defeat fate, we're not only going to be changing the world and the story, we're going to be changing ourselves. So then it's like, well, does that mean that it's not two separate timelines, but just that idea of once fate's defeated, because it also was defeated in Zack's timeline very clearly, that then Zack's timeline is going in behind their timeline, and it's still one timeline, just Zack is still alive now?
Why would the destruction of fate mesh two timelines together, though?
Because it was, like you saw in the background of Zack's shot, that Midgar was surrounded by the Whispers. Like, clearly, why would it mesh two together?
Yeah.
And Zack, they couldn't see the Whispers there. I think that was just
for us to know that it was connected.
Whatever is going on is, I think it is linked or something, that like that harbinger of fate does reach out into other places. But I think if I were to put it in the column of things we know for sure, I would say that the stuff going on with Zack and Cloud is just a different, like, it is happening in a different timeline, in a different reality than the other one.
So you don't think, but then am I reading too much into Aerith's line talking about how it could change themselves? Or is it just going to be like, is that a little bit of a nod to like, it might change the way we act in this alternate timeline when you see more of it?
I guess I just pictured that as, again, another message to more the players than the characters about what's setting expectations going forward.
Yeah. And so I do think, and this is, I believe, another Maximilian joint, or Lord and Savior, but I think it's a beautiful idea. And it's one of those things that's like, oh, that's such a beautiful idea. I can't imagine them not doing it now. Because with the last discussion, I was in the camp of, I hope this is just letting you know that fate is off the chains. Anything can happen, and that's a good way to show it, and they never go back to Zack. That would be great. But like, you know they're going to. And Maximilian pointed out at some point that like, now Zack is going to have Cloud's life. It's like the perfect inversion of the Seven story. And so Zack is going to be joining Avalanche. And then the part where then my brain kicks in is thinking about production of this game. Does that mean there's going to be DLC or sections of the next game where we're playing through locations in the first game here, but as Zack? Because you think about how much money they spent on these environments and everything and these scenarios, like, what would be more compelling DLC than like, here's the bombing mission, but it's Zack? that sounds great and cheap. And like in terms of remixing stuff on the fly, that's a very efficient way to do it from Square's
I want to know why
business
you go
point
to
of view.
DLC for that rather than folding it into the next game.
Because I think they might do that too. I do think it would save them a lot of money. But I guess I just don't know structurally how that would work. I mean, just having a chapter every once in a while and then the next game culminates with like the reveal of all this Zack stuff. I just feel like it's they're so close, not even close. They're basically have just said what's going on with Zack if you're paying attention. And so I feel like they can't stretch that out too much further without just ripping that Band-Aid off. So I feel like DLC might be a good place.
Any of that. I think that there's going to be so my perception of this has been tainted a little bit by playing through all of the Final Fantasy 13 games.
Yeah.
But the way they've done it there, which is a lot of the same creative team, or some of the same creative team anyway, is to just be like, okay, alternate realities can just sort of, I don't know, there's some portal that happens and alternate realities can just talk to each other.
Is this Chrono Cross?
So, yeah. So I think your assumption that we're going to be playing through Zack in Midgar living Cloud's life, I don't know that I buy into that. I think what we'll probably do is have the party that we followed through this remake somehow meet up with alternate reality Zack through magic.
Yeah.
And that's how those paths cross.
Yeah, and like both ways, like if it is just like they have this moment where they intersect and they meet each other, or that the timelines have meshed together. Both, I kind of wonder, like, what's the payoff, I guess, or the end game that they're getting to.
The end game is, wouldn't it be cool to have Cloud and Zack fight alongside each other?
Yeah.
And it would be pretty cool, and they know it's cool.
Zack and Aerith in the same party again?
Yep, sir. In that Ultimani interview, they're asked about that Zack ending, and Nomura says, that's the biggest highlight of the mysteries that have been set up in this scene, isn't it? It's like, clearly it's a huge deal, the idea that Zack's around. He's not going anywhere, folks. Get used to a lot of Zack coming up. But that is... Okay, talking about the next game, I am damn near convinced it's going to be cold open Cloud's Past. I think that's just so close narratively, and it'd be such a cool way to open that. But then it's just so weird. Oh, by the way, hang on. Zexerium says, I loved how neither Kyle nor Jeffa mentioned Hojo saying, you're not a soldier, to Cloud. It was one of my favorite moments of the remake. Yeah, that was the amazing thing. It was like, they just say like one of my favorite reveals in 7, and I was so frustrated that they slipped that in there. But I guess if those, nerds didn't catch it, then maybe it's subtle enough, right?
People are saying cryptic stuff all the time. I think if you don't have the context around that, it doesn't mean anything.
Yes. Right. But anyways, so that is one of my favorite reveals, is like the second version of Cloud's Past, trying to piece all that stuff together. And so if they're opening with Cloud's Past for the second one, how long can they really stretch that out? Would they just open the second game with the second version of Cloud's Past, since we're already basically there anyway?
It's going to be really interesting. I mean, if that is the case, and I'm right there with you, because Cloud's Past is just one of my favorite parts of the original game. I absolutely love that sequence. But now, just where the party is at in terms of what they know about Cloud, what they've heard, that's different from the base game, like how Cloud's Past is going to look and what the party is going to say, I think is going to be really interesting.
I don't think they can pace the reveal the same way at this point. They've already...
I don't think so either.
They've already, shown you too much.
But Cloud still believes what he believes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's still going to have to tell that story.
Yeah. There is, Underachiever says, there's a nice subtle detail with Tifa. She has a brief moment of confusion when Cloud implies that they last saw each other 5 years ago when they meet at Seventh Heaven. It's brief enough not to make newcomers suspect anything, but it's a nice touch for players of the OG. And then Ultima 786 says, right, Tifa doesn't know that Cloud was indeed actually there in the hometown, of course, with the Shinra Grunt mask on. Yeah, it's just that idea of like when Cloud says, oh, we met 5 years ago, and Tifa's like, wait, what? I guess I didn't even catch it in the remake, but there is so much of that fun confusion from Tifa overall.
So Ben, if they open with Cloud's Past, the thing I was wondering about, because I remember we talked about this as being such a great moment in the original, the thing that they lose is that immediate sense of exploring a big world. Remember, like once you get out of the confines of Midgar in the original, and that world theme kicks in, and you like rotate the map, and you're walking around, like that was such a transformative moment based on just like what RPGs had done up to that point, what the series had done up to that point.
But you think about that in this world now, and it's like, oh man, you can go anywhere, but please just walk next door to Calm. Like, it's such a big thing that it seems odd structurally anyway. And so Patrick Henderson is wondering as well, like, do they make the sequel open world? Do they abandon the linear nature? I think they go one more game, and I think like the third entry is going to be open world then. Whenever you get the high wind, something like that. I don't think they're going to go open world for the next one.
I don't agree. I mean, going back to the very first question that was asked on this episode is, I think one of the reasons they stopped and like told the story in the chunk that they did was that they needed more time to figure out the open world stuff for the next installment. That Midgar is a very compact linear chunk of the game, and that going beyond that, you can't do that anymore.
I think you kind of can push it with like the first continent though. Don't you think? And they could save it. I think they could go from area to area, and then eventually it's like, all right, now we have the high wind, and now game on for the third game. And I think it'd be a good marketing push for them too, and probably they need some time to figure out the tech.
That's a good point.
Matthew Paxton has an interesting take here. He says, seeing Zach's actions would give... seeing Zach's actions, like if in the next game you do get to play as Zach or see him going through Midgar in the area that we already explored, he says that would give Square Enix a concrete way to utilize the consequences of defeating Destiny / Whispers / the Fate at the end of the previous game, and then it wouldn't need to apply to our main adventure, which I think is an interesting take here from Matthew Paxton, the idea of like, well, you want to see the consequences of, Destiny no longer existing, but you also want the original Final Fantasy VII still. That's a good way to show it, because they do so many of those teases of, oh, things are almost this way. Like, oh, what if Leslie still had his beautiful girlfriend? Or, they talked about the Easy Allies thing and became obsessed with it. That idea of, they talk so much about, Jessie, she was almost the princess at the Gold Saucer, Jessie, Gold Saucer. And it's like, the idea that they wouldn't pay that off in some way by having alternate timeline Jessie be at the Gold Saucer, I think that's going to be in there in some way, whether it's Zach's timeline or your timeline, however that
1,000% it's going to be in there.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that they left it where Biggs is laying on a bed somewhere and we have no idea what's going on with Wedge, and that Jesse's like, we've just heard the last of Jessie even when we go through the Gold Saucer, not happening.
But I don't believe that our timeline, I don't believe that Jessie's alive, even though her glove is over there by Biggs's bed. I did not take that to mean that Jessie's back alive in our timeline. I think where we'll see Jessie at the Gold Saucer is through Zach's timeline and whatever his universe looks like. I mean, do you expect going to the Gold Saucer and seeing Jessie there? And what does that imply about the nature of Fate then?
I'm still struggling with like just the concession that we're going to be playing through two timelines in the next one. It just, I don't know. It's a big concept that I haven't come to terms with yet.
But God, I hate being this person. But at the same time, it's like, but if they want to convey more story and in a cheaper way, because they got to crank out a lot of these things. I mean, reusing those assets does not seem like an impossible future for them.
I don't know if that'd be satisfying to replay sections as Zach again, though. Like,
I think it would be in the event that we would have that moment of just seeing what's different and how the environment interacts a little bit different with Zach, particularly with just like his personality and like how his journey would be different based on a person with a functioning personality.
Yeah. Well,
maybe I don't know.
If we're gonna take that interview to heart, where he says they're not gonna go deviate incredibly from the original Final Fantasy VII story, I mean that's as big as a deviation as one can possibly have.
But it's not really if those are all flashbacks or the DLC theory or something like that. And then for the main path, it's still Final Fantasy VII. But with Bizarro Sephiroth teasing you every once in a while, being like, I
mean, that could be done through cutscene too, rather than you physically playing through portions of the game you play, but just with a black-haired version of Cloud.
Yeah. Hat.
Also, here's what that line just from that interview just makes no sense though, because it's also the whole thrust of the ending is just emphasizing how they are not bound to events as they happened before.
The unknown journey will continue.
Yeah, in any way. So it just make it. I cannot wrap my mind around the idea, especially since they also have burned so many moments that would happen if the original story had, like that Cloud flying through the nether space and landing in like the duel with Sephiroth on some like astral plane. That happened now.
But they can
you can't
still
do that again.
I think they absolutely can. They can do that, 3 games from now. No one's going to complain about
in a much different context. Like,
and Cloud knows exactly what's going on this time around because Bugenhagen armed him with the knowledge that he needs.
But here's the other thing about it, though, is what they're talking about. If you're talking about like just small changes, integrating maybe a new character here or there, slightly different events, like that's what they did already. That was the remake already.
Yeah,
was a familiar story with a spin. So if you're going to take your whole story and say like, look, we're not on the rails anymore, then you're really going off the rails compared to where you've been.
Yeah, I hear you. Hat wrote in, he says, hey, in my opinion, Biggs and possibly Jesse being alive at the end is probably another scene from the Zack surviving timeline. If Zack survived, he'd probably return to Aerith and Midgar and thus encounter Biggs, who visits the schoolhouse around the corner from Aerith's house. It was established in optional dialogue during Biggs' departure that he visits the kids there. I imagine Avalanche would seek out Zack because they'd want to know why Shinra is so hell-bent to kill him. If Zack was present just prior to the plate drop, I bet he'd be able to stop the plate from dropping since he was actually soldier first class, unlike Cloud. Hence, Jesse and Biggs do not die, but perhaps just get injured. Thoughts? I think that's very smart. I love the idea of, I guess Biggs would be right next to Aerith's house. So if Zack had to connect to Avalanche in a way, that seems like a smart way to do it. The part, though, is I don't think the Biggs being alive at the end is part of Zack's timeline. I think what that is just that he was, we talked about it last week, right? But just that he was barely alive, and then the idea that Destiny is defeated, and then it turns out that he does survive. And that's just the way of showing that in your current timeline.
Sure. The Whisperers just picked him up and threw him in the orphanage, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. V wrote in and says, okay, so at the end of the game, there's some evidence that shows that the timeline where Zack is alive is different than the one we started out with. With that, do you think that Cloud and the others were spit out into the timeline we started out with, or they're in this new timeline? Okay, there we go. That's basically what I was getting at as well in the beginning. I was trying to figure out if there are, in fact, 2, and it seems like you guys are in the camp of, yes, there are 2.
If they really wanted to drill home the fact that there are 2 timelines, show us Barrett with 2 arms. Like, have him holding a gun instead of having a gun for an arm. Like,
or
2 gun arms.
Yeah,
so something freaky.
And a little gun for a head.
For his head, he just has that cannonball arm thing.
I mean,
it's me.
Don't you think there's going to be something with that? Don't you think they'll?
You know what?
I'm going back at it. Like, maybe
stuff...
they will flash to Zack, and it's just going to be different things, and you will see all these very things to show what's the same across all these universes, and then by doing that, they can also highlight what needs to be stopped. That like, oh, this Sephiroth is not only a threat to your timeline, he's a threat to all of existence. You know
what covers a lot of bases that we've talked about already, though, is, and I guess I didn't totally think about this, is that when your party emerges from the vortex or the singularity, maybe they did get spat out into Zack's timeline.
There we go.
In which case, Zack would still be around. Another Cloud would still be around.
Yeah,
that's true.
Like an undamaged Cloud in some way.
Yeah.
And Jesse might still be at the Golden Saucer.
Yeah, that is not a bad idea. The idea of 2 Clouds sucks. Maybe they would do something like, once they come back, then like the other Cloud would disappear.
He's just like a farmer in Gongaga.
Don't come near my crops. I'm
radishes here.
running to be mayor of Gungaga, and god damn it, I'll get it.
Stable hand for Chocobo Sam.
It's the best he can do. James Rodriguez, I like that theory though, Joe. James says, do you think there was a missed opportunity by not introducing Zack sooner? Back at the start of Chapter 8, right before Cloud falls to the roof of the church and meets Aerith, there's that dream sequence where Cloud is talking to himself. Looking back, I feel like this would have been a perfect time to show Zack pushing Cloud to wake up and keep fighting given their past. Doing this could have made the eventual appearance at the end seem a lot less random for newcomers.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, Aerith mouthed the word Zack early on and stuff. Like, there's some Zack connection there. It's not completely out of left field, but I love that it's like that weird sane Cloud talking to insane Cloud, though. Like, I love that bit, and I love that they kept it in there as intact as it is. Joe Halaska says, I'm assuming the implication is that the guys with the numbers tattooed are Sephiroth clones, like Cloud and Kadaj and his gang. Will we get a grand battle at the end of Final Fantasy VII where you take on like 50 Sephiroths? I think the odds are very high. It's going to be like end of Arkham Knight with all the Jokers coming at you. I could totally see them just leaning into that. Like, how do we up one Sephiroth fight for the sequel? Here's just Matrix 2 version of the Mr. Smith fight.
Yeah, and you would say that the probability there is very high?
I do say that. Indeed. Joe, here's a good thinker for you.
Okay.
Darren Burgle says, hey, regardless of whether Square are playing around with alternate timelines, could it be argued that every playthrough of Final Fantasy VII Original or Remake are in fact parallel universes of each other as everyone plays the game a little differently?
Boring.
Okay. Good boy. Let's see. So the Sephiroth stuff. Actually, Jonathan Quevedo has an interesting comment saying, Cloud is a ticking time bomb. He almost killed Aerith before Sephiroth did in the original, and he delivered the black materia to Sephiroth. I think Sephiroth has big plans for a version of Cloud that is not tied down by his own destiny. I like that idea of just like Cloud is just, he's a weapon in and of himself. And so if he's freed from fate, which he is now by the end of the game, then at this point, Sephiroth can just like run him ragged and do absolutely anything with him, right?
I suppose. Yeah, I just don't know like what exactly he would do differently.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I guess that's true. Also, in that Ultimania interview, you got me. In the Ultimania interview, Nojima says, in the beginning, we didn't plan to have Sephiroth appear so often, more as an overlooming presence instead. During the middle of production, we changed our minds and decided to have him appear more frequently. And suddenly, he was in a ton of scenes. And Nomura says, at that time, the co-director quietly pulled me aside and said, I want the characters to fight Sephiroth in Midgar, and consulted me with this idea. In the original story, Sephiroth exists in a different space, and apparently he gathered materials to persuade me to have the battle play out in this way, but I said, okay, sure, and greenlit the idea.
Okay, sure.
That's
creative vision right
hear.
there.
That is, I mean, that does tie into that idea of they have the big picture of Sephiroth and where they want to go, but they do just want, wow, it's the end of Final Fantasy VII. It's got, even if it's just a part one, you've got to have Sephiroth fight Cloud at the end. It seems like that's what Nomura is saying the co-director led him to do. And the tease there is, I like that idea that he says that Sephiroth was existing in a different space. Like, that's a pretty big clue of where they could be going with this, but what that exactly means, if that's alternate timeline or still in the future or how that works is ambiguous.
Right. And I also feel like nobody was expecting that was going to happen. Like, I don't think anybody would be disappointed if at the end of this game that they're, at least people that have played the original, were in a space of just like, yeah, but we didn't get to fight Sephiroth. Like,
right.
Well, of course we didn't. You know, so it's really interesting to hear that they were in a space where like it's not something that people are expecting. It's not something that people are like clamoring for, but like we're going to make it happen anyways, and it's not going to overshadow or impact our plans for Sephiroth in the future.
But even though the hardcore fans are saying that, and not saying they did this, but can you imagine a world where they focus tested Final Fantasy VII Remake and said, who do you want to fight at the end boss? As the end boss, who would be the most satisfying person? It would be Sephiroth for 90% of those comments. You know, it's
yeah,
like,
but that's a stupid question to ask.
I guess if they want to please fans, if they want to please, Johnny Walmart, I think like you want to fight Sephiroth at the end of this $60
Walmart.
Oh, I'm sorry, Walmart. Johnny in Walmart. Look, when Johnny fought Sephiroth in Walmart, what I'm saying is that he'd be satisfied. Can we move on?
Yeah, I guess it's just like the idea. I'll be like, hey, you guys want to fight Sephiroth? like who's gonna say like no? Like
I don't know. I'm just saying I don't think people are as literal. I bet a majority of people playing this are just like, yeah, I expect Sephiroth at the end, whatever, even before seeing him pop up so early in Chapter 2, right?
I want my final bosses to happen when I am driving a crappy green pickup.
Hey, me too.
Darren says, when do you think they'll reveal that Sephiroth was actually Chadley in disguise? Sephiroth said he wants Cloud to get stronger. Chadley is using his data to make Cloud stronger. Coincidence? I think not. I think you're right, Darren. That's a very smart
point.
It.
Did you guys go back and watch the dumb Chadley is a cyborg scene?
No,
yet?
I didn't watch that yet.
I haven't seen it. I heard.
I haven't watched it yet.
See it. I mean, I know they already told you what he says, but like Cloud's response when Chadley tells him this big ridiculous thing about him being a Hojo cyborg, and Cloud's just like, cool.
It's just the John Oliver delivery.
I mean, he says cool. That's his response.
That seems appropriate for his character, at this point.
I guess we can talk about this. The scene where Cloud cried. That was so impactful here, where he had that vision like of Aerith walking away. I guess we haven't talked about it, but you were imagining that was like the scene where Aerith like visits him like in that white forest, right? Like right before she dies in the original game, and that's what was triggering him, was just seeing Aerith walking away from that perspective. Ronnie, did you have that read too?
No, I felt like it was like I never went back and like just like rectified that in what I know now. I guess it, like in my mind, it just was like weirdly, he like somehow has some connection or knows that something bad's going to happen to Aerith and it's going to be extremely emotional. But that's like as thought out as I got.
The vision thing. Are we all on board for Aerith clearly having visions of the future? She's clearly in the know, but it's a little bit complicated. But are we all on board with that idea that she's just seeing the events of the original game?
It's hard to know what she knows.
It's hard to be that clear.
Yeah.
Like why then would she not be more concrete in sort of her messaging? I don't know. And maybe there's a reason for that, but
people are very into the idea that the original Final Fantasy VII ends with Aerith like looking over the planet and smiling. It's that shot, and so the idea is that Aerith is then the one informing this game's Aerith, much the way Sephiroth has gone back in time. That Aerith from the future is communicating through the live stream and informing Aerith in this game.
It's possible, except Aerith knows about the whispers. Those aren't part of the original game. Her knowledge extends clearly beyond somewhat beyond the events of.
But I suppose I mean, like, but if that's the case, if what Ben is saying is the case where, the end shot of Aerith at the end of Final Fantasy VII is informing this Aerith, I feel like she would be able to impart what exactly Fate or these ghosts are doing. Like, I don't think that. I don't think she would be at a loss there.
Yeah, Grant, you coming back to us? Thank you.
Working on it.
Joe. I guess that's an interesting point, and she's so scared of those whispers early on, but I guess she does inform Red 13 of everything he knows. I mean, I think that still lines up fine. That she would know about. I mean, if she's informing her as part of the live stream, you think she would know what the live stream / Destiny wants, right? If they are all part of the same kit and caboodle. I'll take my answer off the air.
Yeah, I'm finding it hard. I guess like I can't off the top of my head think of things that she knew beyond that. But I guess I am not willing at this point to put boundaries around the sort of mystical breadth of what she knows, because it seems somewhat tied to what Sephiroth knows, and he clearly knows more than what's going on.
Yes. So in that interview, they asked Nomura, why is it that Aerith knows things that happen in the future or of things she hasn't heard of before? And Nomura says, I wonder why. Please wait until the next installment for the answer. Great, thank you. Why do you think Cloud is having visions of the future instead of his normal Cloud flashbacks?
Good question.
I mean, is it just as simple as just his fate is so intertwined with the fate of the planet that somehow he's also receiving or connected with the planet more so than he thinks he is?
It could be. I take it as the weird Sephiroth connection in that he knows the future, so therefore Cloud knows the future.
I don't even think about it at that. I don't know it's necessarily like that cleanly connected as much as Sephiroth could just be sending those visions.
Yeah,
so it's not like they passively share knowledge as much as they have a genetic connection that Sephiroth is exploiting for some reason.
And they're always just the worst parts that he's sending them. Because he wants to reinforce that idea that you need to kill fate because it's terrible, when in reality it's more of a debatable end result, right?
It's bizarre Sephiroth just forcing the narrative.
Yeah. Also, we should point out, a lot of people wrote in talking about Cloud clutching his arm when Sephiroth touches him, where he has the geostigma in Advent Children. I believe it's in the Edge of Creation. There's a sequence where Cloud is just like, oh, and he clutches his arm in a weird way that only ties into Advent Children. Is further evidence that Advent Children is much more relevant than any of us could have possibly imagined.
Or wanted.
Well, what are you going to do?
Does Cloud have a tattoo, like a number tattoo?
See, I thought in the original he did, but
no, because he begs Hojo, like, give me a tattoo, give me a number, give me a number.
That's it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, he's a failed experiment, so he doesn't get one.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Julian's the one that wrote in about that geostigma and stuff, and he said, like, I'm scared of the multiple timelines and everything, but in the larger sense, it's still everybody's going after Sephiroth, and you're trying to save Aerith, which is like, yeah, it's nice just to zoom it every once in a while, not get too bogged down in everything else here. Predictions for the future. It's fun to look at like lingering threads. What's still out there? Obviously, we got our boy Roche ready to go, raring to go. And
can we get a Roche chant here?
I was hoping that it's gonna be called, I think, Final Fantasy Remake Episode Roche.
I think you're right. I do think you're right. So I think in one of those spoiler discussions, they brought up the good point too of like, Roche is so over the top. Where can they possibly go with him? Except for down in the worst way, right?
Yeah, I really like that.
And when they see that idea of President Shinra being like, hey, soldiers, their cells really fall apart and they become messes of human beings through like the Crisis Core evolution, right? That like, is Roche going to be the way that they explain that? So there's more of a ticking clock for Cloud overall?
I really enjoyed that part of that Easy Allies discussion. Just seeing like a sad sack of a Roche that you just end up feeling bad for with all of his bravado in this game.
Right.
That'd be a really cool direction to take with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Ronnie, odds that Roche joins your party?
I would go with no. I don't think Roche is going to.
0%.
No, I would say 7%.
I was going to say 17%.
77%.
I think we're done with Roche.
We are not done with Roche.
Are you nuts? What are you talking about?
We are absolutely not done with Roche.
We haven't even. You do not even know Roche.
I will not buy this next game if we're done with Roche.
I'll pre-order it right now.
Avalanche, the Avalanche storyline. That was one of those things that they brought up in the spoiler discussions that I did not know about, but the full story of Before Crisis, and that if you don't want to know the spoiler for Before Crisis, heads up, but that idea that Rufus is connected to Avalanche and he's actually running the show, at least in that Before Crisis storyline, which is very bizarre. But that idea of mainline Avalanche going into the future, Joe, you said that you watched Barrett's ending where he's talking, or not his ending, but his date scene where he's talking about all those others of Avalanche, that all those other members that it seems like they're going to be the people that we're interacting with in the future.
Yeah, I thought. In fact, when I had that scene with him, I was assuming that he was going to tell me how they were all such good people and they died.
Yes.
And then he was like, "No, I'll introduce him to you someday." I'm like, "Oh, cool."
Yeah, it's right there.
So I think that's a clear thread forward.
Yeah. What also connected to that, I mean, they're talking so much about Wutai and the idea of this war of Wutai and Midgar. Wutai has to be huge, right? Not to the scale of Midgar, but they're going to blow that thing out, right?
I certainly hope so. Otherwise, that would make negative sense at this point for Wutai to try to take on Midgar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Wutai is going to be our hub for the next game. I think. Like if you're talking about,
interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
That's my prediction.
I love that. Do you think there's anything there with Hojo talking about breeding Aerith with a member of Soldier? Do you think Hojo's going to try and get Zack and Aerith together, or Roche and Aerith together, which send me that VHS tape, brother.
Remind me though.
I'll email you something later.
Remind me, in the original game, does Hojo keep going with that experiment?
No, you see him in Corsa del Sol and he says, "I'm on vacation."
I gave up.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection is that the whole "let's breed the ancient" thing was only really his goal in that one sequence in the tower, and then after that, he has other evil plans.
So, what do you think was the point of that S&G type reference in this, tying back to Crisis Core? I mean, he's going to want to do some breeding somewhere, and it seems like maybe that's Zack's timeline then, is Hojo kidnaps Zack and Aerith and puts them in a tank together?
I think that you are reading way too deeply into a line that was like, you know what would be cool is if we acknowledged those S&G type soldiers.
Yeah, that's how I thought of it too. But no, man, like in your time, like what happens exactly?
Well, they're in the tank. You never believe it. The weird pumpkin monster is watching them out the door.
No, so Ben, I'm thinking back again to that interview that we had back in 2016 with Katase about FF7.
Yeah.
The remake. And specifically we asked, like, hey, how obligated do you feel to loop in all of this stuff from the compilation of FF7?
Yeah.
And the response was like, we won't be able, it's impossible to get everything in there. Some things, if they're a good fit, we'll find a way for them. Some things might just be a reference in dialogue.
Yeah.
I think this is one of those times.
Okay. All right. Also, Joe Halaska wrote in to tell me that I was very wrong when I was talking about how Hojo's like, ooh, I'd love to meet their offspring. And I thought he was talking about Sephiroth and that Sephiroth might have a different lineage, but he points out that no, he was talking about getting Aerith and Sephiroth to breed or to mate, and that he wants to meet their offspring. That's my bad. That makes much more sense than them changing the timeline with Lucrezia and all that fun stuff from Dirge of Cerberus, which we know oh so well. Other predictions for the future? Does anybody have a bold one?
I have. Well, I mean, I don't know how they're going to fold this in, but I think we get playable Turks.
Ooh, that's very good. Like, okay.
Think about, I mean, you've got four of them. That's enough to fit on screen. They have distinctly different fighting styles. We've seen Reno and Rude so far. Like, I think
love that.
If not for a huge sequence, I think you get at least a mission as the Turks.
I'd be cool with that.
They did say in that interview, they're talking about stuff that they cut along the way, and one of them was more Turk side story stuff. So who knows if that was playable or just fleshing things out more, but clearly they love the Turks from their presentation in this game and everything else about Final Fantasy VII ever since the original game.
Yeah.
If they would have scrapped the train graveyard and done a dive into the Turks before the plate drop in, oh my God, I'd be so happy.
Yeah, but then those children's souls would still be trapped, so I guess it doesn't make sense.
Can't forget the children.
That's true. Let's see. Ricky Winterborn says, I think the Gold Saucer is what I'm most excited for. If they made Wall Market into such a fun part of the game, the Gold Saucer should be like 10 hours of amazing stuff. And then Jason O'Brien says they're going to pack it full of $14.99 in-game purchases, minigame collections for the mobile version of Gold Saucer. He's very cynical, but I mean, Gold Saucer is going to be out of this world. Can you imagine?
I can, and I like
right
it.
now.
Do you think they'll
here's
have
the thing.
Oh yes.
So in our original Final Fantasy VII Game Club years ago, Hanson.
Yep.
My memory of Gold Saucer was this, like you said, this like fun, vibrant place. And then as I was listening to our discussion of it back then, it seems like generally it's much more of just a collection of bad mini games than I thought it was.
How dare you? But
I say, how dare you?
I mean, they're gonna have an element of that here, right? But
oh yeah.
I mean, Joe, Moghouse making this game? Is Moghouse going to be blown out with the same level of a Hell House fidelity? My two favorite houses.
I think Moghouse will be like an arcade game that you see in the background. I don't think you're going to play Moghouse.
My prediction is you're going to play Moghouse for 2 hours.
Just more boring than you could possibly imagine. Do you think they have, if they're incorporating previous mini games into this Gold Saucer? Well, this is the weird thing too, because there's stuff that's like the submarine and stuff where it's like kind of foreshadowing, right? And so then it's like, well, is that if they haven't made it yet for the remake?
It doesn't let you play those before you do.
You're right.
Yeah.
But do you think they'll have like Whack-A-Box and every possible mini game that they've tried to create? They're gonna have like pull-up competitions. They'll throw all that stuff in the Gold Saucer now, right?
It'll probably just be Chadley with the VR goggle. And you can play all the mini games in VR style at the Golden Saucer.
Golden Saucer is
just a bunch of cyborg Chadleys lined up, trying to shove VR things on your arm.
Play with us, Cloud. Cool.
Dio. Who could forget Dio?
Oh, our boy. Dennis
Can't
M
wait for Dio.
writes in. He says, "Hey, what scenes are you most looking forward to in the next game? For me, it's Barrett's backstory culminating in the fight against Dine on the scrapyard. Dine's suicide was very emotional in the original, and I really hope they won't tone it down. That's going to be messed up to see. I cannot wait to see what they do with that entire section." Scott Bullard is wondering how they're going to do the Midgar Zolom, the snake, in part 2. Like, are you going to have to be on the chocobo to avoid it? But he points out, in a world where you already defeated Destiny, the idea of being scared by a giant snake is not exactly...
I also feel like they'll find a good way to make that snake look effing terrifying.
Yeah. Like, it's going to be like mid-cutscene, like Tifa's like, I think I might see a cave opening this way. Jump scare, something nutso.
Yep.
Oh, and it's going to look like the world serpent from God of War, right? It's not just going to be a pretty big snake. It's going to be like a continental snake.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that was my original screen name, by the way. But the hashtagonist wrote in. He says, "My bet is that instead of the dead snake that Sephiroth killed, they use the junkyard shopkeeper for shock value." He's just impaled on the pole.
Finally, we can go home.
Credits roll. The unknown journey has been known. Anthony Baz says, "What do you see as the perfect stopping point for part 2? This is so tough. Because originally I was like, oh, cold open, clouds past. Part 2, which I'm with you 100%, Joe. Calling it remake doesn't mean anything. It's not part 1. And even Nomura hinted at that. That is remake in the sense of, as in Sephiroth is remaking the game. And so it's just going to be Final Fantasy VII : Sephiroth's Requiem or something bizarre like that, you know?
Or revised or it'll be re-something.
Do you think?
I think.
I don't know. I think they'll have Sephiroth in there.
I think it'll be like Final Fantasy VII redefined or some. Yeah.
Go
ahead.
Anyways, but I thought it was going to be cold open, clouds past, and then end with the real version of Clouds Past. You know, him piecing his stuff together. But then I'm thinking about it more. It's like, well, no, because I think the Temple of Ancient, City of the Ancient stuff is just too powerful not to be the close of this game, right?
Yeah. Once Sephiroth kills Tifa in Temple of the Ancients, that's where they're going to end the second game.
Well, do you want to make a bet on this, Joe? I mean, we will never remember this, but just in case we do you want to make a bet about whether or not Aerith dies?
Sure. Yeah, I'll bet you $5 that they keep Aerith alive.
I'll bet you $100 she dies.
Hold on.
Somebody's more
No.
confident than...
I'm not going for 100, man.
Okay, 20.
Okay, $20.
Oh, okay. And this is in all of them or just in the next game?
Just the next game.
Oh, Oh, what? Come on.
There's a lot of content to get to before that happens, though.
Yeah, you never know when they're going to cut it off.
I'll bet on the only reason I'm hesitating is that like I don't want to say they'll never do it, and then something happens in the next game that like changes the story so drastically that it's like,
okay.
Well, then they'd have to. You know?
Oh god! All right, $20. Aerith dies next game. Great, nice doing business with you, sucker. Let's see. Charles Davis is hoping that they carry forward character progression into the next game. He's like, anything less than that will just feel incredibly unsatisfying. I don't want to reset all of our levels and all of this stuff.
No way.
They will.
They will, Ronnie? Do you think you'll import your save like EJ Crow wants?
No. We'll start from square one.
I mean, level 43 or something?
Sure, but I mean, like, yeah, we won't be able to. I don't think we'll be able to like import our own specific material that we leveled up and so on and so forth.
No, and I think in one of the spoiler modes they had an interesting theoretical too of like, what if it opens Cloud's Past right when you get out of Cloud's Past? Yuffie comes and steals everything. It's like that is a pretty clean way to wipe the materia clean.
I think all they're going to do is this, they'll give you a standard array of materia. I don't think you're going to get it stolen or anything. I think it's going to be like they might even say, "Hey, you're still level 50, but like the game is going to scale as though that's level 1. You're going to have some powered up fighters, some power up. I mean, like you're going to get a standard material loadout. I don't think they're going to let you import because, like, seriously, if I could bring in the Götterdämmerung that I got from beating the Pride and Joy prototype.
Oh, right.
That's just ridiculous.
And what does that item do again? It's like limit breaks automatically?
It gives you a limit break at the start of every fight and recharges your limit break more quickly during the fight. So you can start with one right away and then like a minute or two later, you just automatically have it again.
Right. You know, in what universe they wouldn't have to worry about this is if it's all Zack next game and you see flashes of Cloud. And they don't have to worry about it at all.
Well, what's Zack trying to do? You're real hung up on this play the game again, but a Zack idea.
I just think they'll do it. I think in some form we'll go through these same areas again as Zack. That is my prediction.
I hope you're wrong.
Oh, well, I hope I'm wrong too. Actually, I don't know if I hope I'm wrong. Crater says, honestly.
Go ahead.
No, Joe, go ahead. You work yourself up into a tizzy.
I think you're right in that we will get a glimpse of Zack like that. I don't think that there are going to be expanded like narrative arcs with Zack walking around in Midgard.
I think there will be. Crater says, honestly, all I really want to know about the future of the remake is how they're going to pull off Knights of the Round. If they maintain the current summon setup, are they going to have 13 heavily armored dudes just popping off on the battlefield and wrecking face?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That sounds absurd. Hopefully they're like really small though. It's like me.
What about a gold chocobo running across the ocean too and up and down mountains like
oh my god. Oh, the chocobo breeding. That's going to be so bizarre.
Oh yeah, Chocobo Sam getting all weird with it.
Oh, you like it, don't you? Donnie says, for the last segment, I struggled through the worsening plot, uneven dialogue, and what I thought were some unfair difficulty spikes. However, there's plenty I enjoyed throughout this, and I look forward to the next entry. I don't have any predictions, but I do have some hopes. Minor improvements would be like keeping your ATB when interrupted and having 0 flying enemies in the sequel.
Yeah, or just like an improvement.
Or just, they can be
better
flying.
Aerial combat.
Yeah.
Yeah, just keep them close to the ground. Because I think it is kind of a fun element every once in a while of needing Barrett for that, right?
Yeah.
But it is
they
such
did
a
in the
mess.
original game.
Yeah. Finally, I'd like to say the Deepest Dive has been one of my favorite gaming experiences in years. Ben, thank you so much for putting so much time into this. Thank you. Kyle and Jeff were great voices for us, even though they haven't played the original. And to Grant of MinnSnack's fame and best friend Ronnie, you two were a real delight. You're both funny and thoughtful. And I can't wait to see where in MinnMax you show up next. Is that nice?
Thank you.
I agree. I enjoyed listening to your guys' discussion of that game.
Oh, that's very sweet. Plus, Ultra also loved you guys as well. Joe, I have a bone to pick with you. It was years of sorting through emails sent to podcast@gameinformer.com and trying to trim out all the compliments, but every once in a while I'd accidentally leave one in and I would get shit for it every time. And now with Andy as host, I have not heard one person give him shit for leaving in compliments, and it drives me insane.
Because he's the boss.
He's my boss. I don't know.
Damn it. Danielle Van Pelt is wondering, do we play as Zack before the series of games finish? Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody think no?
I mean, I think yes. I don't think it's going to be as comprehensive as you think it is. It's going to be like a retelling of Midgar as it stands right now, just with Zack.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we'll play as Zack.
There we go. Dean Pritchett says, did the giant Whisper Harbinger boss at the end give anyone else vibes of the weapons from the original? Yeah. When he was forming, we talked about it last week a little bit, but like when it was forming, I'm like, oh, it's just going to be a weapon. And then it's like, oh, it's not. But then in the end, it's like, well, what's the difference? It's a giant entity created by the planet to protect the planet. So what's the difference? The name
There
weapon?
is no difference.
Thank you. Thank you, Ronnie.
Really, no, I actually had that thought as well. Like it seemed like it had the same effect as like a weapon.
Yeah. Joe.
Of course, though, its origin, I'm not entirely sure about.
Yeah.
Because it like comes out of the planet.
Right.
When
right.
the planet's in danger.
And so it's a slightly
and they're all
different
released
thing.
at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So no, you're wrong.
Hang on. Here's a. Everybody listening to this, put your feet up somewhere. Put your hands behind your head. Tell us you can get used to it. Does the Destiny thing, killing Destiny, only exist on this planet? Because, like, how does that work?
What do you mean? Like,
so, because it very much ties the concept of destiny and fate in with, like, it's the planet trying to protect things. I know the planet's, Gaia is this sentient form almost, I guess, literally. Is the planet sentient in Final Fantasy VII?
I kind of feel like it is, yeah.
Okay, let's say yes. Killing it is great, but like if there were people living on the equivalent of Mars, or I guess just Mars, because we see it in the original final battle of Final Fantasy VII, people living on those other planets, are they also unchained from fate?
Like people living like on Mars? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Okay, but this is where I'm going then. Does that mean when they go into space in Final Fantasy VII that fate is back in play? Hello,
I don't
is
know
this
that
thing
they
on?
leave. I don't know that they do they exit the atmosphere far enough.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I don't think I can
like-
get used to this, Ben.
Yeah.
Man, just think about it.
And like
No.
and like when supernova is summoned, like what planets are dying?
right, exactly. I'm just wondering. Hey, I'm just asking questions.
No, it's those good questions.
Thank you.
Are those planets sentient too?
I think so. I think there's
Okay.
a little cute Mercury sentience. I don't know. Robbie Flanagan says he was really disappointed in the part with Elmira's flashback where there wasn't the fat guy getting lifted and spun around by his wife at the train station. That was his biggest bummer in the game. It was a little bit of a bummer. All right, Joe.
I was keeping an eye out for that.
Oh, I was too. It would have looked so distracting, though. It would have been so distracting. Joe, we kept this as a very, very post-credits conversation in one of the audio versions, but am I nuts for reading into in Aerith's house that the first object you can trip over is you kick a bucket in Aerith's house as a subtle Easter egg for Aerith dying? Do you think that's insane?
Yeah.
So just a
It's funny.
coincidence that it's a bucket that they put there that you kick repeatedly in Aerith's house.
That's a good joke. I mean, like, do you know that kick the bucket is an idiom in Japanese?
No, I guess I don't know that.
Okay.
What are you going to do? Let's see. Alan Liebold loves that they kept references to Let's Mosey being in the remake, just like the localization, having fun with that. Matthew Wynn says, since becoming a patron, I went back and listened to your Advent Children commentary. You guys made it bearable. Thank you very much. We recorded a full commentary track.
Thank you. That's
Several
huge.
people wrote in saying it was very funny, which is nice because it got a little squirrely. It's a little messy.
Yeah, it definitely did.
Matthew says, hey, during that, you guys listed off your favorite Final Fantasy games in order, and I was wondering where Remake falls in that list now.
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. That's honestly, like, as it stands right now, I find that really hard to answer when we just don't know. Like
This game.
It's like reading a third of a book.
No,
you
it's
know,
not.
and being like,
No, it's not. You can say that your favorite book is Prisoner of Azkaban or something, because even if it's not the complete story.
I agree with Ronnie. Yeah, you can't do that.
Look, let's play along for the sake of this wonderful Patreon supporter.
Yeah.
Honestly, if you put a gun to my head, if you put Barrett's gun to my head, Big Bertha to my head,
Big Bert.
I mean, I just love 7 so much, and I love a lot of Final Fantasies, but I love 7 like a notch above in the other ones. This game's my number 2 at this point.
Same with me. Yeah, that's kind of the thing that went through my mind as well. Is like it's hard to not love these characters as much, even the second time. And like, just going back to it, like I feel like it was a home run here in terms of like how they handled the characters for the most part. Particularly, I love the new Barrett, Tifa. Really, I do. Like, I feel like Barrett's just, like, much more scoped out. Yeah.
Joe, you're refusing to answer? Is it somewhere in the middle tier for you?
I'm thinking about it. So I really like Final Fantasy VII, but it's actually not soup. I'm trying to think where it is on my list even.
Easy.
But this is, I'm just saying, I don't think 7 is top 2 or 3 for me. I think it's maybe 4. I've cataloged this somewhere on the internet.
But you're 6 and then what?
And then probably 10, I think.
Interesting.
Anyway,
hang on. Wait. 6, I understand.
Yeah.
10, okay, I'll accept it. What's number 3?
I don't remember offhand. Probably 4.
Don't try and think back to your list that you wrote on GameInformer.com in 2011. Just trust your gut right now, Joe. Listen to your soul. Listen to your inner Gaia.
Boy, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's close. After 6 and 10, you're getting into a tier of a lot of games that I like very much for very different.
Yeah, but
reasons.
how about you name one though?
I mean,
just say one. What's it gonna hurt?
Let's say 7 is next.
Yeah! We did it, y'all! We won the game club! And then remakes a lot, like remakes below 12.
No, I mean, remake is close to 7 for me, I think. Despite all of my problems with its ending, I think when you're dealing with a game that is 95% as great as this is, in a ranking of Final Fantasy games, it's hard. It's
Joe.
I mean, the fan in me is just loved it.
Yeah.
So for most of it,
the weird thing with 7 is like I was frustrated by the combat, the things we've talked about in this episode. At the same time, is this the best Final Fantasy combat system of all time?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say so.
I think it is. Despite its frustrations.
It's evolving upon, like, you know, kind of what we've seen in the last, you know, few iterations. And it's starting, to me, I feel like, and I've said this before, but it's starting to feel like I prefer it over the more turn-based combat, which is a huge compliment.
Yeah.
I don't remember who wrote in with the comment, but if they could incorporate portions of the Gambit system from 12 for your party members in this, that would be the ultimate Final Fantasy combat.
Yeah, but that auto cure was so frustrating. I liked having direct control. I just got burned by that auto cure early on, and I was scared of it ever since. So if everybody has levels of that,
I mean, you could write basically scripts for your characters. Like if they got below 40%, they would automatically use a potion or cure. It was really simple to get them to do exactly what you wanted them to do.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess it's just that unknown thing. But Grant, do you have an idea of where remakes fit in for you?
It slides in right under the original Final Fantasy VII, which would be, I still like 8 the best, and then it would be 7, and then the remake. And then above anything else.
And then anything else directly below that?
Honestly, 12 has climbed the ranks for me. When I replayed that, the PS4 version, that game is really cool. I didn't give it its due when it first came out, but it's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm happy to see another person who loves Final Fantasy VIII.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That's Bizarro Sephiroth right there in a game.
Yeah. I'm also a big, like, that's another one that is fighting with Final Fantasy VII for very different reasons for that, you know, spot on my list too.
Yeah.
So
I feel like everybody here, I mean, Ben, you really like 8.
I love 8,
right?
but I mean, I haven't played it since it first came out, and that's why I was debating doing it as a game club / deepest dive when the remake or the remaster launched, and maybe we'll get to that in the future. Knowing how many Final Fantasy fans are now fans of the deepest dive format, it's tough not to go to 8 at some point in the future, right?
That was fun to play on Switch too. That was nice.
Oh yeah, damn it, that would be fun.
Mhm.
But as for the future of the Deepest Dive, we are going to be going back to Animal Crossing. We're going to be picking up with that squad, which is going to be fun, checking in on where everybody's at, and that'll be in the near future. We're also going to have a mysterious one-off in the near future, which I'm excited to have, just a one and done. Should be a fun adventure. And then after that, it's going to be left up to the community to vote between a couple of options of maybe some new releases coming up, maybe something else. And so stay tuned to patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns for a chance to vote on the next Deepest Dive. And even if you aren't a fan of the game, we hope that you're a fan of the format, and we're very thankful to everybody that supported us for the Final Fantasy VII Remake Deepest Dive. Like, it is the most successful thing we've ever done, and so thanks to everybody that wrote in along the grand adventure. Hopefully we can do more 7 content in the future. Thanks to everybody that participated, jumping on the webcam here. Joe Juba, thank you for being here, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad I could finally be on.
You wrote in for a Chrono Trigger Deepest Dive frequently. That was very sweet of you.
Yeah, I love the Deepest Dive stuff that you guys do. So.
Oh, thanks. Has there been one discussion about continuing game clubs at Game Informer?
Not right now.
Okay. It's tough. The remote thing is weird.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is interest in it, and it's just a question of, how much time do we have? How big is our video team? That kind of thing.
Yeah, it is a silly thing to pour a lot of hours into. Like, that's why I don't think more outlets don't do it. But it's like, well, the nice thing about Patreon is, like, if the community's there for it, we'll be there for them. I love doing this stuff. I'll do it for the rest of my life. This seems great. Yeah. And
you got 400 plus comments on that last episode?
It was bonkers. It was amazing to see. Yes, absolutely. Any complaints about MinnMax in general? Anything driving you nuts about our coverage or logo? I know you like the old theme song better, which I appreciate you pointing out.
Hey, I'm here to help.
Call him like you see him. All right, dude. Well, you're welcome back at any point in the future, Joe.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Cool. And thank you so much for watching or listening to this grand finale, officially, for the Deepest Dive on Final Fantasy VII Remake. Again, if you enjoyed this discussion, enjoyed this format, we'd always appreciate it if you shared it with a friend and just a fan of Final Fantasy VII, or share it with a fan of Chrono Trigger, anything like that. We'd appreciate the help spreading the word. Thanks so much, everybody. Roach. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. The Deepest Dive is the best, most thorough discussions about games on the internet. Prove us wrong, please. The MinnMax Show podcast airs every Thursday. Patreon supporters vote on what we stream every single week, and a whole lot more. Give us a shot, try subscribing to the YouTube channel, and we hope we can win you over.